On his 5th birthday, the boy collapsed. He was thrown into a nightmare, a vision of a man beaten, covered in blood, kneeling before the executioner who held a sword above his head, ready to strike. A squad of women in uniform silently watched as this terrifying scene unfolded. The executioner's gaze was cold and unyielding, while the condemned trembled, holding a face mask of horror, blood, and tears. Swift, brutal motion, the sword descended and cut the man's head from his shoulders, while the onlookers remained completely motionless. The boy lay in bed, the nightmare dissolved, and a shocking realization struck. This was not just a bad dream. This was the game world he knew in detail, and the villain who had just been killed in that scene was. It was him. He froze, sitting upright, convulsively clutching his throat. Fear of the coming punishment surged like a wave. He remembered everything he had ever loved about the game. It was a fantasy land of love and war, created for adults. The main character, a man known as the Sword Emperor, destined to become the strongest swordsman at this point in the story, was simply enjoying the life of an academic. The story followed this protagonist. He fell in love, trained side by side with comrades, and together they all grew stronger. Their main goal was to thwart a coup plotted by the evil Duke along with his family, and ultimately defeat them. A terrible truth settled on his soul. It was Luke Hagato Disgusto's, the 5-year-old second son of that very Duke. And he remembered, in the game, this character, Luke, had a truly creepy nickname. The nickname was Disgusting, Fat Tadpole, mocking his ugly appearance and character. He remembered how the game Luke matured into a petty tyrant, abusing his family's power to torment the protagonist and his allies. The memory of more mature scenes in that game, which he still could not handle then, made him shudder. He recalled the tragic story of the character he now inhabited. Luke told him that those terrible character traits were explained by the death of his mother during childbirth and the subsequent complete neglect by the entire family. Having no innate magical talent, he developed a deep inferiority complex. In desperate search of recognition, he committed evil acts but ultimately became a disposable victim used by the Duke and then executed. His role in this whole picture was insignificant. He was not even a serious obstacle, the only purpose in the story to be killed. Realization struck him with visceral horror. He imagined a hideous man doomed to become and understood. This transformation would happen in about 10 years when both he and the protagonist were doomed to live exactly 15. He clenched the pillow convulsively. A spark of defiance flared within him. He thought if he could stop that terrible version of himself and commit no evil, then maybe he could change his fate. He did not want to die. Fueled by memories of a past life, he felt, no longer needing the love of a family that would never give it. A brief fantasy of a peaceful future unfolded in his thoughts. As a nobleman, he could live comfortably and without worries, but that thought flashed by and vanished. He quickly dismissed the idea, immediately realizing the vulnerable spot in his plan. He recalled a critical detail. He could not change that fact. His family was evil. A purge was coming for them, and he would still be caught in its whirlpool, regardless of his own actions. To survive, he would need enough strength to protect himself. His gaze fell on his own small hands. Despite the character's history full of defeats, he remembered one important detail. Luca Disgustos, as they say, had a talent for magic. Focusing, he felt a strange ethereal energy flowing inside him. This must be mana. Then the question became simple and terrifying: how exactly to control it? In the game, there was an interface, but here, in reality, he had no such helper. A thought appeared. Maybe it was as simple as a spell chant. Focusing his intent, he pressed his palms to his chest and spoke the word heal. In response, his body was enveloped in a soft, shimmering glow. The light faded, so he had no idea if the spell worked. Without a health bar to check the result, he could not be sure. Yet, as soon as he sat down, he had to admit, it became a little easier. He continued training all night, repeating the incantation again and again, trying to develop the newly acquired skill. The spell lasted until his voice broke off and he fell silent. Next morning, a gentle voice cut through his drowsiness. His personal maid woke him and asked how he was feeling. He felt sluggish like slow cotton, but he immediately noticed the usual sickness was not there. The truth dawned on him. He had simply exhausted his mana and fainted. From this, he concluded his reserves would last for a maximum of about 10 castings of this spell. When the maid checked his forehead and seeing he still felt bad, he realized solo practice was not enough. To truly master magic, one must study properly and preferably with a teacher to guide him. He quickly dismissed this thought. He was sure his father would never agree to take a magical tutor. The other way was only self-study. He called his servant, an exclusive maid, a 12-year-old dog beastman named Syrup, and asked to bring a book. When she returned with a volume titled Magic Fundamentals, she was surprised and asked if he really wanted such a difficult text. He did not back down. He insisted that he wanted to learn how to use magic. After that, he changed tactics and put on the sincerest, gentlest plea. "Please, syrup," he asked. His vulnerability unexpectedly worked. The maid shuddered from it with amazing force. At the indicated place, resting his head on her knees, he declared that he could only reliably rely on her. Then he added one more request to teach him to read and count. Embarrassed by Garbai's straightforwardness, Syrup could only note that, after all, he was still a boy. Her initial surprise quickly disappeared, giving way to passionate determination. A radiant and stubborn smile did not leave her face. She held the book high and declared that he could rely on her. Her energy now flowed boundlessly. Referring to the typical traits of dog-beast men, she suggested they also seize the opportunity and start physical training. Comfortably settled on her knees, he gave a short, muffled refusal. And so, despite his dislike of physical exercises, his mentorship on Syrup actually started. She immediately immersed herself in the text. Her face was stern while she absorbed the first lesson. She begins his lessons reading from the book Magic Fundamentals while he throws his head back on her knees. Luke expresses his surprise that she is able to read such long, complex words, and she reassures him. Everything is fine with him, but as soon as she reaches the explanation of the difference between attributeless and attribute magic, she falters and struggles for the right words for a long time. Despite her hesitation, Luke grasps the essence. He understands the energy similar to a soul that he feels in the air is mana, a transparent force, the power and volume of which depend on innate talent. This confirms his suspicion. He really has a gift for magic. He reviews his past victory and finally understands. Then he could create heal simply by imagining his own mana, healing wounds. The basics are clear. The spell is released when you visualize the desired result and direct your mana to embody it. Next, the text unfolds two forms of magic. Attributeless magic is a basic type available to everyone, while the more powerful attribute magic requires a special innate talent, one that, they say, most nobles have. When drowsiness overtakes him, he recalls his own origin. He is disgusted by that family, famous for its skill, and he wonders if this inheritance means that someday he too will be able to use tribute magic. His training finally exhausts him and he quietly falls asleep. Syrup gently carries him to bed and places the book Magic Fundamentals beside him. Barely smiling, she carefully pulls the blanket over him, making sure he is comfortable. For a moment she stays close, and in her gaze tenderness mixes with anxiety as she watches him sleep. Luke, now looking more mature, looks back on his progress. He recalls the difficult start when he constantly fainted from exhaustion, but in this exhausting process he learned. If you completely deplete your reserves every day, you can increase the overall capacity of mana, the magical energy stored by his body. He taught himself to read and immersed himself in learning with greed, firmly determined to change his bleak future. Yet a sharp frustration still grips him. He never managed to find a proper magical mentor. Service in the annex, only the head butler and 3 maids can offer him only so much. She remembered what his body was like in the game, covered in pimples, spots, warts, and cracked skin, also burdened by obesity. It was obvious there was room for improvement, and he decided. His first priority was to take care of his health. His efforts began with simple hygiene. When he washed, he was struck by the sensation. Bubbles clung to his hands, a common phenomenon that led him to a stunning realization. In this world, people seemed not to adhere to daily bathing or washing. This new habit caught Syrup's attention. She watched him with curiosity and asked why the water was so foamy. Luke explained that he had delicate skin and needed to wash it carefully, a phrase that clearly surprised her. She reacted with an exclamation of disbelief and doubted how he could have such delicate skin. He knew she wouldn't understand until she saw the future he was trying to prevent, so he simply brushed off her concern and said it was not a problem for now. From that day, the two established a care routine and performed it twice a day. Syrup declared that, as his personal maid, she had to learn his order and do everything together with him. With him, this new emphasis on self-healing extended to bathing. Now he did it alongside magic training. He dreamed of a future where he would be rich enough to buy elite-class goods, soap, lotions, moisturizer, sunscreen, and not worry about the price. While he washed, Syrup watched from the veranda and was glad he was learning to take care of himself. She assured him, in a year his skin would become completely smooth, and if he kept this up, he would grow into a real handsome man. And Luke was still getting used to the very idea that he needed to wash his body so thoroughly. His prophecy began to come true as his appearance noticeably improved. Syrup noticed he had become much healthier, although it was clear from him that a lot of thoughts were spinning in his head. He recalled an important change he had recently made and informed his father. From now on, he and Syrup would cook for themselves. He made this decision because he always felt terrible after the food brought by the cooks. The illness had to be repeatedly soothed with healing magic. The results of his new diet appeared instantly. Enjoying the delicious dish he had prepared himself, he realized the food of this world simply did not suit his physique. His health improved as soon as he started cooking for himself, so it turned out that there was nothing wrong with his digestive system from the start. Syrup also noticed that he stopped sleeping late every morning. It was part of his new unchanging routine. Now he got up early and immediately went outside to the forest near the annex to expose himself to the sun. He also began going for walks and doing light exercises, stretching his body that had just become flexible. Syrup shone pleased that he could finally go outside. Later, while he soaks in the bath, Syrup suggests starting training. He immediately rejects this idea, explaining to her that he cannot stand exercises, so there can be no talk of it. With a serious face, she asks if he does not want a healthy, peaceful life. He confirms a healthy, peaceful life is exactly his goal. Syrup presses on the most painful point: how can life be easy at all if he only eats and sleeps? He warns that he will very quickly become something terrible. Syrup agrees, admitting such a life is really hard to maintain without problems. She herself relaxes in the water and sinks into thoughts, how sweet he is now, and how hard it is to imagine that he has become so ill. She imagines how he can grow into a real handsome man. He continues to unfold the explanation and adds that a calm life would also leave him a terrible amount of free time. Sierra puts him in his place, stating that as a nobleman he has the right to leisure. He retorts, when leisure is constant, it stops bringing joy. Even daily walks in the amusement park or casino quickly become boring. His thoughts darken as he absorbs his reality. Although he was born noble, he knows there is no safety net for him. Considering how his father behaved, he is certain he will eventually be sacrificed or abandoned. He remembers himself as older, a person who wasted privileged upbringing and brought about his own ruin. He decides to make the most of what he has now and prepare for the future. His plan is to use his privileged childhood to avoid unnecessary difficulties. Ideally, he will find a wife who will support him in the future. If not, he decides to find a source of income so that he can live independently and comfortably. He was analyzing the structure of the world. He now found himself in a world broken into two main arcs. One choice that could sharply shift his path to avoid Elisada's Royal Academy, because the character Luke was supposed to appear primarily in that part of the story. The first path was the war arc, a grim tale about how to resolve an incident started by the villain. The second was the Academy arc, a lighter story focused on romance and training. He realized mastering both was his ticket to the future he desired. Cold sweat appeared on his forehead. The logic was simple. If he skipped the academy, his chances of survival would increase significantly, yet he had a compelling reason to come. The reason was in them, the game characters. The montage of their faces and adventures filled his head, and a soft, sincere smile appeared on his lips. He loved them. Looking at the sprawling metropolis, he became even more determined. He would like this world like Luke. He decided to become a happy sloth. Syrup briefly summarized her dream: to live peacefully without unnecessary complications in good health. For this, she insisted that he learn fencing. Luke, on the other hand, preferred to move as little as possible, yet he noticed her own sincere enthusiasm for the blade. She did not back down and pressed with arguments. It was needed not only for his protection but could also be truly enjoyable. He calmly remarked he did not need to learn as long as she was nearby to protect him. Surprised, Syrup asked how he knew she was training in fencing. He simply replied he had a feeling. A bright smile lit up her face. She gladly accepted the responsibility and told him to leave all sword fights to her. With a simple "all right," he agreed. As she went to bed, she wished him well. The next morning, despite refusing every offer where Syrup was used to make him train, he knew he could not completely erase himself if he wanted to stay healthy. That's why, as he ran through the estate grounds, he was going to use a new spell he had just invented. He stretched his hands forward, palms facing each other, and magical energy began to thicken between them. "Come out," he commanded, and began the spell, Valak. He finished the spell and a smiling, jelly-like creature emerged into the world. He named it Val, a creation of his own original magic without any attributes. He created this spell with a clear purpose: it works even when he is asleep. To understand how Val works, one must first grasp the basics of nameless magic. This basic magic, which simply transforms mana into various forms, is generally divided into 5 main categories. He considers the first 2 types. Household magic covers simple and practical tasks, creates light, cleans. He believes spells are widely used because the world is rarely washed. Next is power magic. It draws mana to temporarily enhance physical characteristics. Its effectiveness heavily depends on the physical condition of the user. It burns endurance for the sake of power. The third category is enchantment magic, a specialized school that imbues weapons with attributes. It is a type of buff magic mainly used by smiths and enchanters, and he admits that he has no idea how to perform it. Next, he focuses on support and magic. It strengthens or weakens others by enveloping them with mana. Its power depends on the caster's own imagination. The last category is restorative magic. It precisely stimulates the body to heal wounds. He is confident in this area thanks to the medical education he received in his past life. He concludes the review by stating that all these schools of magic rely on a basic principle, the transformation of mana. It is this principle that he applied to create Vova, a unique self-sufficient spell. Submitting his work for review, he finds it amazingly easy to use. He just has to give the command, "Val, bring me that water," and the creature immediately surfaces and collects the liquid. The animal returns with water and he offers her a word of thanks. Then he declares, the real test is only beginning. Laying his head on the table, he entrusts everything to his newly created one. The true purpose for Val is revealed when he sleeps peacefully at the table. He ordered that this thing wrap around his body. During Rastan, the creature executed the order flawlessly. He devised the perfect plan in his head to train the body without training himself. But when his magical creature forcibly drove his limbs into hard practice, his mind stayed aside, boldly watching the process and finding a grim pleasure in it. His logic was simple: if he could train while unconscious, then it was a trifle. Next to the gelatinous creature, Val confirmed, yes, this is exactly the variant he had seen. The fact that the creature could move on its own became a wonderful achievement. Thanks to this, he could train and at the same time maintain his favorite, calm, easy rhythm of life. Later, when his automated training ended, he leaned back on the sofa, and a thoughtful expression slowly settled on his face. He lay surrounded by stacks of books and admitted, everything is going as it should, but there is still a lot of work. At the same time, he prepared for the muscle pain that would definitely hit tomorrow. A sudden spasm of hunger interrupted his thoughts. It was still only afternoon, but the training had clearly done its job. Besides, he was still a growing boy. At that very moment, Syrup appeared with a dessert. Luke decided that excessive restraint was also bad. After all, he was moving towards the life of a lazy, cunning nobleman. Smiling contentedly, he savored the sweet treat. 5 years passed. In a huge library, 11-year-old Luke sits immersed in a book, while nearby 17-year-old Syrup stands watchfully. He approaches, smiling slyly, and calls his name so that he looks up. Without breaking from reading, he calmly asks what she wants. It seems the large chair he is sitting on rises and lifts off the ground, hovering in the air. Syrup freezes in shock and demands to know how he is floating. Luke thinks to himself that holding oneself in the air is the same as carrying a glass, and decides that explaining to Syrup would be a hassle because she is weak in magic. She chooses to evade the answer and asks if she wants a ride. Her shock fades, giving way to curiosity, and she quietly dares to ask if it is possible. He confirms, of course, it is possible. She nervously approaches the chair hanging in the air. He tells her not to be afraid and explains that he uses his mana to properly support it. Calm down, she agrees. When she sits down, her face lights up with confused, stunned joy from this unique and at the same time so comfortable sensation. She exclaims that she has never felt anything so comfortable before, which pleases him. Gathering her thoughts, she raises her hand to ask another question. He allows it, and she asks how his body is so well trained if all she has ever seen is him reading, sleeping, or walking. He admits that her misunderstanding is quite understandable given what she has noticed. He stands before her and explains that first he compresses his mana and densifies it. He demonstrates this, creating a complex glowing sphere in his palm. Just look. And while Syrup watches, her eyes are wide open with concentration. A powerful aura bursts from his body. It turns out that over the last 5 years, VL has evolved significantly, and at the same time he has deeply mastered it. Then he showed another side of his training. In the spacious yard, he was spinning a series of fast, precise combat forms while Syrup watched from the door. His body dissolved in motion, a high kick immediately followed by a powerful block, then a sharp punch. Marshall's spectacular skill completely stunned Syrup. Her eyes widened with admiration. She looked in shock and did not understand what she was seeing. She remembered how he always said he couldn't stand overly intense workouts. Despite her confusion, she still watched as he completed his routine, stopping only after the final focus punch. His face was filled with extreme concentration. He exhaled quietly, and from the effort, a faint blush appeared on his cheeks. He immediately praised his performance, declaring it incredible. Turning to her, he asked her to honestly say what she thought about it. Syrup gasped and breathed out in confusion, impressed by how hard he must have worked. She said his movements were like a master's, unlike anything she had ever seen, even from experienced martial arts masters. Then he revealed the secret of his mastery, a new spell he invented himself, Trace. He explained that it allows him to absorb VL and take in her memories directly into his brain. This ability, he continued, enables him to flawlessly reproduce the movements of his favorite martial arts masters. Even if he himself forgets all the exact details, VL can restore them and even mix techniques from her favorite fighting games and manga. And then he summarized all the knowledge he absorbed. He connected and synthesized every fighting style and its history, and all of this transformed into his own unique martial art. He explains to Syrup, although his hovering spell is impressive, he has already invented another. He has trained his body long and hard, building muscle memory and strength even if he himself is not fully aware of his own movements. Syrup froze, staring at him with wide-open eyes, and declared that he is a genius, but he calmly denied it. She continues to marvel at his progress. She whispers to herself, her 11-year-old master has already managed to see the mysterious abyss of magic, and when Luke admits that he doesn't understand what she means, Syrup just smiles and says it simply means. It was just hard for him to grasp. Later, standing on the balcony, Luke says he is tired after training and asks if Cyrus wants him to prepare a change of clothes. Inside, he thinks that his advanced knowledge came from a past life, although he still does not fully understand the mechanics of it all. His fatigue is driven by the road to spring in the forest. He declares his intention to take a short bath, and the syrup maker with a basket agrees to join. Diving into the cool water, Luke realizes this is their nearest bathing cove. Thoughts about Syrup float in his mind, and he remembers how other maids gossiped about how beautiful she has recently become. He recalls the beauty honed by her regimen and the fencing training she had for the last 5 years. Her fierceness was polished, and her beauty reached a new level. He calls her by name, and her instant, fiery reaction makes him think that seeing that sweet, loyal side in her is his special privilege. After resting, they return to the room. Now Luke has a hood thrown over him, so in the robe he orders Syrup to inform his father that he wants to determine his magical attribute. She agrees without hesitation. After the request, he leans back into the soft armchair and looks ahead, waiting for the event while the Syrup tilts and drives away. When she leaves, his thoughts rush to the fundamental principles of local power. Here, tribute magic and innate ability received from birth is called power defined by God. He wondered how innate magic was determined at all. It all came down to something simple. They would say what attribute you had, but he had no idea who exactly would decide to tell him this. This responsibility lies with the Ministry of Magic Elecitus, an institution that governs all attribute spells in the kingdom, and consists only of the most outstanding wizards in the world. Lying alone in his room, he felt confident. Someone from that elite circle would come to inform him about his attribute, the privilege of nobility. He knew that some are born without attributes, but he did not think he needed to worry about it. Ultimately, the Disgustos family always had particularly good qualities. He recalled the sandy trait of his father, the iron one of his older brother, the seductive one of his older sister, and even the stony trait of his stepmother. Such a mighty family, he could not help but wonder what gift he himself would have. The anticipation was felt on the skin. He simply could not wait. Next day, he jumped out of the room, riding on a hover cushion, but he was intercepted by a stranger standing right by the door. The Mana stately-looking officer in a dark coat commented on the beautiful girl riding on the cushion. Luca was struck by the man's guess, who tried to look but could not understand whether he really looked so cute as to be mistaken for a girl. While he was digesting the man's words, Syrup stepped forward to make introductions. It was Malsa Glico, head of the Attribute Bureau of the Ministry of Magic. The gaze of the head maid of Syrup jumped to the person on the pillow. He paused, adjusted his glasses, and, as if quietly illuminated, something finally became clear to him. Now, when Luca was sitting upright on the cushion and a bowl of syrup stood beside him, the official finally spoke, addressing him incorrectly, "Young girl." He praised the maid for her wonderful memory, amazed that she remembered his full title after hearing it only once. He pondered. Such perfection is to be expected from a servant in that respectfully repulsive atmosphere of his home. After his praise, he looked over her shoulder into the room and asked where he could find the young master who spoke about that family. Syrup simply replied that it was quite natural and pointed with his hand to the little boy sitting in the big armchair. The boy, Luca, watched the exchange of remarks and had no idea why the official had just praised the maid. Syrup, noticing his confusion, officially introduced, "This is Luca Hugolo Disgusto-sama." Malso Glyco stopped at his own surprise. He expected that the syrupy Zippiati the beastman would be scolded and was even ready to intervene, all because of the persistent teaching of the state church. The supremacy of the civilized, which says that all non-humans, beastmen, half-humans, spirits, and demons should be punished. Luke, sensing the man's character, realized he wasn't so bad after all. He approached and greeted him familiarly, like Malson. The official interlocutor recoiled slightly in surprise and corrected him, introducing himself again, Malsaglico. After this, he extended his hand for a handshake and asked to be simply called Luke. Malsa looked down at the small hand waiting for him, and his face softened a little. The official accepted this gesture. He shook the boy's hand and responded in kind. When the formalities were completed, Malsa announced that it was time to check Luca's magical attribute. He ordered the boy to close his eyes. Luca obediently did so, and Malsa, holding his breath for a moment, inhaled evenly. A restrained nervousness flickered across his face. He pulled out a small pointed instrument and it began to glow dimly. Holding it in front of him, he prepared to start the determination. The result came immediately and was clear: Luca's essence, sleep, and disorder. He recalled the moment when Malsiglico named the names of his attributes. At that moment, he feels these traits manifest within him not as a discovery, but as a confirmation of what he had always known. He is overwhelmed with wonder and he whispers, "Amazing." Malsaglico offers to explain further, but Luke sharply interrupts. He suddenly realizes what magic he can use just by hearing the names of the properties. The official continues, clarifying that among all magical attributes there are special ones, rare magic. He confirms both of Luca's attributes, sleep and laziness, belong to it. He explains most attributes are publicly recorded, but rare magic is traditionally kept secret. He suggests officially registering Luca's abilities under a vague description of magic that affects the human body, and Luca agrees. Luke admits that only the simplest applications of his powers come to mind and asks if there are other ways to use them. Melsa says that everyone has spells they naturally suit, and growth comes through exploring one's own abilities. He raises a finger, emphasizing, finding a magic you like is the only true path to mastery. Luke quietly contemplates the man's words. The boy promises to keep this advice in mind as soon as he begins training, but Malsa, in turn, looks very surprised by such a response. Official surprise turns into shock. He demands to know how Luke could have known about appraisal magic at all, a concept he just claimed the boy had no idea about. Luke calmly responds with a question: isn't evaluating his traits the same thing Malsa just did? After that, he reveals where he got this knowledge. As a reincarnator, he simply assumed such a thing existed, but didn't know it was supposed to be a secret. He calmly orders Syrup to serve the guests some tea, completely ignoring Malsa Glycos's embarrassed, hiccuping reaction to the recent revelation. While Syrup serves them, Malsa takes a sip and his composure slowly returns. He closes his eyes and says the tea is incredibly tasty. He asks about its name, and Luke explains that it is a personally recommended herbal tea beneficial for the body. Syrup adds that she grew it herself, so it cannot be bought. Malsa notices that the brew has already properly cleared his head. He smiles, thanks Luke for understanding, and offers to give him some tea leaves. Then he asks for confirmation that he must keep the matter of appraisal magic a secret. He says he has his own daughter about Luke's age and very fond of magic, so the tea, of course, pleased her. Luke looks surprised to learn that Malsa has a daughter. The mention of magic sharply shifts his attention. Mal Salini looks ahead, staring intently, and asks about the flying cushion Luke used earlier, stating with full confidence that it is not an ordinary spell. Luke just smiles and brushes off the question, saying everything is fine. Catching himself on his sharpness, Malsa apologizes for the outburst. Dessert Syrup holds a small jelly-like creature. Inside, Luke gestures towards it and suggests to Mal that they talk. When the sun sets behind the distant mountains, their long conversation finally comes to an end. A little later, as Malsa is about to leave, he thanks Luke for his time, but Luke stops him with an unexpected question: will Malsa be his mentor? At Malsaglico's request, he covers his mouth with his palm and freezes for a moment, as if he did not expect that. He asks why the boy needs a magical mentor, saying that he personally does not think Luke needs one, and clarifies what exactly he wants to learn. He clarifies his modest proposal. He simply wants Malsa to respond to all the letters he sends with questions about magic that he himself does not understand. Essentially, he is asking him to be a pen pal. The man's face changes to a smile. You realize that the idea interests you. Since he agrees, the boy impatiently asks if that means yes. Malsa responds with his condition. He asks if Luke would mind if he occasionally asks him a few questions as well. He agrees immediately, although with a slight touch of modesty admits he is not sure he can answer even one of them. After that, Malsa smiles and announces that they have agreed. When all the agreements settled, they exchange bright smiles. Luke sincerely thanks, and Malsa confirms that he will be happy to write with this. And so their correspondence began. Later, Luca settled comfortably and read the letter, recalling how he got himself a tutor in Malsen, and because of this became quite knowledgeable in math. From his research, he reached a key distinction. Unlike attributeless magic, where mana can be freely transformed by imagination, spells with an attribute must follow certain rules depending on the attribute itself. It was his evaluative magic that allowed him to realize his innate magic. He learned that inherent magic is the name of the basic spells for each attribute. For fire, for example, these are Pilot Light, Fireball, and Fire Arrow. Everything beyond these basics entirely depends on the user's knowledge and practice. Wandering through this, he reflects on his own trait, a dream, which also has 3 innate magical spells. The first is simply a dream, a spell capable of putting the target to sleep. Its effect can be precisely adjusted. The strength depends on how much mana is poured in and the resistance of the target itself. He continued the analysis and derived the last 2 innate spells of his attribution. The second, Sleep Timer, a spell that determines the duration of sleep by touch so that the target does not wake up during the designated time, no matter what happens. The third, he reasoned, Sleep Delete, the ability to forcibly break and completely dispel any sleep magic. With these abilities, he realized he could put people to sleep even before they understood what was happening. If he added his laziness ability to this, his targets would completely lose their bearings, but he knew there was a catch. Magic can be repelled thanks to natural resistance and protective spells. This limitation gave him an idea. If the user of the fire attribute can create a fire arrow, then maybe he can make a sleep arrow and put people to sleep from a distance. This thought brought a confident smile to his face. Both of his attributes were so amazing that it looked like a loophole in the rules. He looked down at the open book and the letter from the new tutor while his thoughts were already racing through various options. He could put the teacher to sleep and skip lessons whenever he wanted. There seemed to be no end to these different spells he wanted to try, but even a whole lifetime would not be enough to test them all. Luke told about how he grew a new habit. Every morning he sits down and gives control over his body to a single vowel. He noted that this practice clears his mind, making it easier for him to focus on his magical experiments. Regimen Syrup approaches and asks if he wants to eat. He agrees to her offer with enthusiasm. He completely follows their schedule like a gamer. Although the syrup is perfect in every other way, he still prefers to cook for himself, relying on memories of dishes from his past life. They take turns cooking food. After all, it's simple. Her food is completely edible, but it entirely lacks any attention to detail. Already 11 years old, Luke decides to wash off the sweat after training while she cooks. He feels his anxieties growing with each year, but pushes them aside to deal with later. He heads to the nearest water source, a natural spring hidden in the wilderness. As he begins to wash, he hears a faint sound of voices. The voice sinks into despair. A young girl sobs that she is about to die alone. He is amazed this hidden place is almost never visited by anyone. Listening to the sounds around, he notices their source in the forest. He decides that the place is not too dangerous and wonders if it is a lost child. "Who are you?" he calls. His voice shakes her and she quietly exhales something like "ha." When he takes a step closer, he realizes she is not alone. Suddenly the clearing fills with a strange, continuous sound. The girl freezes, looking at the half-naked Luca. Her cheeks are burning, her hands cover her mouth in shock. And he stands and looks back with an equally flat, indifferent expression without a hint of amusement. That the girl was to be a guest at one of the tea receptions of his sister, an event he had completely forgotten. Meanwhile, the girl was extremely embarrassed. Her eyes darted about and she, trembling from shock, choked on her words. It was a panic. He introduced himself with a smile exactly about what Luke Hugello was talking about. The girl quietly screamed, then her face brightened with recognition. She asked if he was the younger brother of her esteemed Iris. Then she officially, though awkwardly, introduced herself, Karen C. Caribbean, the 12-year-old daughter of Count Caribbean. Luke watched her, barely smiling. Her sincerity amused him. When he spoke, he addressed her familiarly, Karen. And he said, her formality suddenly vanished, giving way to an open curiosity. She knelt beside him and asked if he could use priestly magic. As soon as she spoke, his face lit up with pure admiration. He confirmed that he could and added, he really likes magic. He took her hand to help her stand up. Then he threw the question back to her and asked if she would show him her own attribute magic. Her answer burst out instantly, full of enthusiasm. Yes, right now, Serge declared. Professional haste made him ask if she worked somewhere in a shop or a similar establishment. With a polite apology of "Excuse me," she began. A flash of light, and before her appeared a small decorated pouch. From it, she pulled out an amazing set of kitchen utensils, explaining that all her magic was just the pouch itself and the rest of the items could be bought anywhere. He was eager to examine her magical pouch. It looked like it held much more than it should. He said he wanted to see her attribute magic, but gently hinted that maybe she should get dressed first. In response, she began to cook. The sizzling of oil filled the clearing as she skillfully handled the frying pan and stirred the large pot. Her attribute magic was simply cooking. In a moment, she handed him a hot bowl of spicy soup with moon rabbit. She explained that it was just a dish she cooked with what she had and kindly invited him to taste it. He was tormented by the question, what exactly changes the taste of a dish prepared with trophy magic so radically? As soon as he raised the spoon to his lips, an extraordinary aroma spread through his nose and memory. At that very moment, as soon as the soup touched his tongue, an explosion of flavor overwhelmed him completely. It was incredibly delicious, better than anything he had ever tasted even in his past life. Shock momentarily lifted him off his seat. A wave of power flared inside him. The food gave a beneficial status, a buff. He looked down in surprise. The bowl was already empty, and it immediately dawned on him before him was a young noblewoman capable of cooking dishes that enhance abilities. His gaze fixed on Karen with renewed strength. It was then that he stubbornly decided she was the best possible asset for the idle life he desired. He would not let her slip away. He called her name and she responded. He leaned forward and seriousness froze on his face. He asked her if she would cook this soup for him every day as soon as they grew up. Karen stared back, her eyes wide with surprise. Without hesitation, he declared his intentions, placing his hand on his heart. He confessed. He said he would gladly marry and join her family. The proposal threw Karen off balance. Her face flushed red. Lucas' thought was simple. The most important thing was her incredible cooking, and he believed that she would continue to feed him even if in the end his own disgusting family was crushed. She could only awkwardly squeeze out a question and thereby confirm that he had just proposed to her. For Luke, this day became an amazing encounter. That amazing encounter set events in motion. Lucas immediately contacted his father to make the proposal official, but the Duke, showing no interest, simply ordered to act as he saw fit. Everything moved quickly and soon the families agreed to meet. Lucas and Syrup arrived to be greeted by Count Caribbean, Karen's father. He warmly welcomed them to his restaurant. In the restaurant, the Count gestured for him to sit down. Luke apologized for his father's absence. The Count waved it off and said he knew. The Duke had just appeared briefly and immediately left, but inwardly he was stunned. The head of a noble family did not come to his own meeting with his son about the marriage. He listened while the boy spoke and looked as if the absence of his father did not affect him at all. Luke said outright that he did not care that Duke did not come, and Karen wondered if the intimidating presence of this man was too much for her. Then he made his intentions perfectly clear, spoke directly to the Count. As the second son, he explained that he was free to offer himself and formally asked if it would be acceptable for him to marry and join the Carib family. Christina's face blossomed with a broad, delighted smile. He enthusiastically accepted the offer and declared that the Caribbean family would gladly welcome Lauka. His loud and carefree yes confused Karen. She looked at Lauka, her face frozen in complete disbelief, and asked if he was really willing to be with someone like her. Before Lauka could answer, her father joyfully interrupted the conversation and declared that Karen had already confessed her love to this boy, causing her to instantly blush with embarrassment. He remembered hearing it was she who confessed, but another anxiety gripped his thoughts. He said that rumors were gnawing at him, as if other girls were mocking Karen because of her appearance. He knew exactly who was behind it. A girl named Iris came to mind. She was only 12, and she bothered everyone except that pretty girl she singled out. He grimaced, realizing it was about his own sister. Examining Karen's appearance, he looked more closely. He admitted to himself she was a bit plump but still young, developing. Moreover, her round face seemed quite charming to him. He thought Karen was a good person, but honestly admitted he was actually drawn to her culinary skills and her status. Hearing this, the Duke expressed gratitude that a guy like Luca could see the beauty of Karen's soul, although Luca silently corrected that he saw it differently. Then the account shifted the conversation to family origins. He explained that in the Caribbean it all started with fishermen and traders, and now they run a whole variety of maritime businesses. Noticing Luca's fair face, he became concerned and said, "In their family, including himself, everyone often goes to sea, but Luca looked too weak for the sun." Karen told in detail about her place in the family and explained, since she had no brothers, she would inherit the house. And she cheerfully added that if a younger brother were born later, she would gladly give him this role and use her culinary skills to open her own restaurant. Returning to the Count's earlier concern about the son, Lucas gave a confident reassurance. He explained that he trains and is stronger than he looks. He also declared his resistance to the sun is perfect and revealed a secret weapon. Sunscreen. He thought that with his challenge to Val, he would not get sick at sea and the luggage would be carried for him, so all he would have to do was sleep. Having resolved this, he felt it was time to stop imposing on the family. Before he could apologize, the Caribbean Count spoke, entrusting his daughter to Luke and ordering the two of them to enjoy their time together. Luke immediately agreed, thanking his new father-in-law. Count burst into loud laughter at the name, waved his hand as he walked away, and said the boy was too hasty. When the father left, Karen sharply turned to Luca. She breathlessly said his name and declared that she wanted to become so beautiful as to stand next to him, and this momentarily threw Luca off balance. He remembered overhearing, since childhood she had been terribly worried about her appearance. He told her she was already quite cute, but she immediately objected, saying he meant something else. She clarified that she wanted to grow her beauty, and her thoughts again and again turned to Iris, the one who always seemed to look down on her. Luke offered help, immediately warning that he was a strict teacher. Karen prepared herself and agreed. Her determination wavered as soon as she asked if it was even possible for a person like her to become beautiful. With a confident smile, he assured her, "It is possible," and he said there is a very easy way. At first, a thought flashed through Trigger, to use a dream, ability, and vow to help her with the diet, but he quickly realized that losing weight for this was not her true goal. He realized that this was not the time or the place. He suggested they go somewhere else. Karen agreed, then asked if they could address each other by first names only. He immediately allowed it. Then he called Syrup and ordered her to check that no one was following them. When their privacy was guaranteed, he told Karen that they would continue the conversation in his room. He explains to the surprised Karen that his dietary method works through magic. He admits, maybe he is overreacting, but he is worried about her older sister after what he overheard, and he wants to get straight to the point. He explains, simply put, it is a way to train while you sleep. Karen finds it hard to grasp this idea. He reveals that his attributes are sleep and laziness. She is stunned by this fact, and he confirms that he will use his sleep attribute for her diet. He goes on to say that the process is quite simple. He mixes his magic without signs with the incantation Val the Slime. The plan is to apply his sleep magic to her, and then Val will enter her body and perform a set of movements that her body will immediately replicate. Karen, looking at the little slime, finds it incredibly cute. She correctly deduces that Val must be a self-sufficient spell. He confirms her understanding and suggests starting by demonstrating the process on himself. Val envelops his hand. Then he orders Val to do a light warm-up and sets the sleep timer exactly for 1 minute. A minute later, he wakes up. Karen is clearly stunned. Her hands cover her mouth in shock, and she exclaims that his movements were incredible, like those of a martial arts master. Wiping a drop of sweat from his forehead, he marvels at the incredible feeling. He trained but doesn't even remember the effort. He calms Karen and says she just needs to let Val inside, after which she asks if she can do the same. He asked if she was skilled in training, and Karen honestly admits, no. While Syrup helps her change into more appropriate clothes, Luca suggests trying it out, and Karen readily agrees. Dressed for activity, she agrees to light exercise to get her body used to it. She flexes her bicep and proudly declares that despite struggling with exercises, she is quite strong. Luke silently notices the contradiction. The result is immediate and devastating. Karen lies on a she-leather deckchair, completely exhausted, drenched in sweat, gasping for air and wondering if it was really just a light workout. Lucas stands calmly over her and asks how she feels, but she can only produce a barely audible, blurred answer that trails off in a broken whisper. She moaned. Her whole body ached so much it became immobile. Luke lifted her and explained that they would start with basic exercises to build endurance. He suggested using healing magic but warned that some muscle pain would still remain. Despite the pain, she nodded with stone determination, promising to do everything she could. Luca smiled, encouraging her not to give up. Then he moved on to his beauty regimen and ordered her to lather the soap well. He explained that the foam would absorb the dirt so harsh rubbing would not be necessary and the skin would be protected. Karen absorbed what she heard and understood the logic. She followed his instructions, carefully applying the foam. The next step, he added, was to thoroughly rinse it off the face, making sure that every time it touched the skin, it did not brush it. With a clean face, it was time for makeup. Karen looked at the entire collection of bottles, her eyes wide with curiosity. Luke noticed how quickly she grasped everything and how excited she was. So the apprentice she was turning out to be was exactly the kind that brings satisfaction. The last part of his plan was nutrition. During the lecture, he emphasized, a good body cannot be built without the necessary nutrients. When Karen was already dressed, she liked the lesson and she appreciated his lamenting about how he cooks and praised his skill. Confident that he is capable of creating tasty dietary food with the right ingredients. Inspired, she started with simple recipes, dishes made from soy and steamed chicken salad. Then Karen became completely hooked on creating new, healthy dishes. She took all his fundamental ideas and in an instant transformed them into an impressive selection of unique dishes. There was no room for an apple to fall on the table. It was bursting with food. Luke said she had cooked way too much, but to himself, he happily seized the moment, finally trying Japanese cuisine in this new world, natto hamburgers and miso soup. She looked down and hesitated. Karen admitted, overeating, even healthy food, was not allowed, but she couldn't force herself to throw anything away after being so eager and wanting to try a bunch of different dishes. Luke Kumlai suggested a solution, to give the excess to one of the nearest orphanages. She shines with inspiration and declares, the idea is perfect. She can explore cooking and everything they themselves cannot eat, give to orphanages. Putting the plan into action, she begins to cook even more dishes and daily, delivers them to various orphanages. Luke notices this and thinks that everyone wins here. When they ride in the carriage, he asks if she will go again today. She confirms, admitting, although he gave her this idea, she much prefers just lazing at home. She continues and reveals another reason for her refusal. The orphanages lack basic hygiene and it is visible to the naked eye. A rat scurrying along the floor between the boards makes her sharply recoil. Conditions there are frankly terrible. Children crowd near dirty cages. To the children, many of them disheveled, rush to her in crowds, calling her by name. She realizes with horror, even pure magic cannot cope with everyone in this building. Worse, many orphans cannot use magic at all to clean themselves. She explains to Lucas, the church runs the orphanage, but priests appear only when money is involved. That is why she feels she cannot freely use her healing magic. Her story is interrupted by a young girl in panic. She rushes forward and begs to help her little brother. He fell and is not waking up. Her disgust with the church confuses her and makes her uncertain. Noticing this, Lucas gently covers her cheek with his palm, calms her. Nothing can be done and he himself will go check on the boy. He finds the boy lying in bed, breathing is shallow and heavy. Luke quickly assesses the situation, suspecting pneumonia. He glances around in the neglected room where the sick boy definitely has no place to recover. Leaning over the child, he places his hand on the chest and focuses his will. He imagines the boy breathing normally and utters one word, heal. A soft light emerges from his palm and the boy's tense breaths immediately begin to even out. Timidly, the boy's sister asks how much the treatment will cost. Luke answers simply, nothing. When the now healthy boy sits up, the sister suddenly bursts into tears and sincerely thanks Luke for his kindness. He turns away, his face reveals nothing. Calmly, he explains that it was only practice of his magic. As the Duke's son, he assures them he does not need money at all. His words confuse Karen. She says he did not need to reveal his status but thanks him and realizes, now she knows how to cure exactly that disease. Profusely thanking, she draws attention to Luca, who shifts his gaze to Syrup and calls her. Quietly noticing that Karen is smart, he reflects, it would be much easier for her to live if things around were better. Guided by the unspoken intentions of her master, Syrup stands before the orphanage director. With a confident smile, she suggests, if the Duke has more money than he knows what to do with, it is quite logical to spend some of it. The director hesitates, but Luca steps forward and dismisses any need for deliberation. He declares that refusal is not an option and places a heavy bag with 50 gold on the table, ordering the director of stunts to use it to improve hygiene and start teaching the children. He reviews his recent impressions and suddenly realizes shelters have become a real testing ground for his healing magic. Here he can hone his skills on everything from poisons and diseases to wounds inflicted by monsters. And he admits to himself, once he came almost without purpose, but now the situation truly interests him. Now at 14, Luke looks back on the past 3 years since his engagement to Karen. His life has already settled into a calm, familiar rhythm. Syrup the maid meets almost all his needs. Karen cooks for him every day, and he still regularly uses slime, Val, to maintain his health and appearance. He feels that his perfect lazy life is steadily getting better. He also admits, thanks to Karen, he has experienced so much new and completely different. But now a poignant realization dawns: these quiet days are coming to an end. The reason for these inevitable changes is that Karen has to go to the academy in the spring, which means she will have to live in a dormitory. Because of this, he decides to make the most of the time they still have together. Keeping this in mind, he notices that Karen is late for their meeting. Thinking he knows where to find her, he decides to go and look for her himself. Entering the main house, he notices something strange. At this time, next to him is his older brother, Testa Huguelot Disgustos, who is already 19. Testa passes by without saying a word, completely ignoring him. Luke thinks to himself, despite having grown taller than his brother, Testa seems not to care at all. He rejects this meeting. He decides to knock these thoughts about his brother out of his head and focus only on finding Karen. He is sure he knows exactly where she will be. The search leads him to the garden, where he sees or sits on a chair calmly and gracefully amid blooming flowers. He watches her from afar and notes that her diet has become a real success. Now she is widely considered a true beauty, praised both for her appearance and her femininity. His fascination is interrupted by a familiar voice calling his name. He turns and sees his older sister, Iris, who is sitting at a nearby table. She smiles and asks what brought him here. Just as he fails to answer, she glances at Karen and asks if he intended to borrow her, then clarifies if he came to put an end to their tea party. Luke almost swears when he realizes Karen came to his sister, Iris Huguelot Disgustos. He stands before the table and declares that he came to take back the kidnapped bride. His sister, Iris, shoots a sharp look at him. The mood sours from this intrusion. Her power is refined. She knows any man who meets her gaze usually succumbs to her charms and becomes merely a toy in her hands. This time, no effect. Karen apologizes to Luke, noticing that he seems completely invulnerable. He confirms this, and Iris silently bursts with irritation. He assures Karen that she has nothing to apologize for, then shifts his gaze back to his sister and asks if her little game is over yet. He insists, arguing that it is unfair when Iris monopolizes Karen's time. Since he will only attend the academy in a year, he wants to be with her until then. Iris brushes off his request. He should get lost because when they are together at the academy, she will have plenty of time to talk to Karen. The tension between brother and sister is hot, and Karen is confused but secretly pleased at the thought that 2 handsome men will compete for her attention. Nearby, Iris sulks. Her plan is clearly not going as she expected. Seeing no other way out, Luke bows low, a gesture of formal apology ceremony. He tells his sister that such a grim expression spoils her beautiful face. Then he lifts his gaze with a gentle smile, reminding her that she will soon also go to the academy, and encourages her to do her best. His words seem to have worked. Karen quickly finds an excuse to leave Iris's company. Luke takes her hand, deciding that this is better, and alone admits that since he rarely sees his sister, it is wise to stay on her good side. As they walk away, Iris is left breathless and flushed, and suddenly a stunning realization dawns on her. Luke is the only man whose beauty can match her own. A lingering, possessive desire rises as she whispers his name, admitting to herself he wants him. Several months pass. When Karen went to the academy, Luke stopped going outside. He lies in bed. He doesn't care, but he absent-mindedly thinks about which book he should bring him today. He tells Syrup that they are going for a walk. She is surprised, says how rarely that happens, and hopes it won't rain. Somewhere further, Malsaglico reflects on the situation. Syrup always handled the shopping, and the shopkeepers themselves came to Luke. And he concludes, Luke has no one to visit except himself. She continues to note how unusual it is. Settling on his bed, Luke asks her to accompany him regardless of the weather. With an indulgent smile, Syrup agrees to his request. Your journey begins. The Dukratska carriage, drawn by 2 mighty horses, rushes down the road, spurred on by urgency. In the carriage, Luke closes his eyes and remembers how Karen once led them outside. He already misses her. Syrup, in reins and wearing a cloak to hide ears and tail, shows herself to be a skilled driver. Luke announces their arrival. They go out onto the street. Luke notices how quickly everything happens and notes that no one dares to stop the ducal carriage. He looks ahead intently and aloud wonders what he will see there. Their final stop is well-known Great Motto Shop. It is a huge department store that Luca recognizes from the game. They sell everything from gear to gifts for potential romantic partners. When they enter, they are greeted kindly and warmly. Luke turns to Syrup and says she can buy whatever she wants. She thanks him sincerely. He is immediately greeted by a well-dressed man who calls himself C. Matoth owner. The man correctly identifies him as the young son of Duke Disgustos. Luke silently notes, for a merchant, the most valuable weapon is information. The owner leads them past the main trading hall and into a luxurious VIP room, inviting them to sit down. Morskimato, the shop owner, says dealing with a boring old man is terribly uninteresting. To make things at least a little more interesting, Morsky suggests introducing his daughter to handle all the affairs, while the attendant nearby assures them they can ask for anything. After being introduced by her father, a bright young woman appears. She introduces herself, Akari Mado, the 14-year-old daughter of Morsky. Luca immediately recognizes her, one of the main romantic heroines in the game, the key to the merchant's storyline. Akari warmly greets both Luca and Syrup, says she hopes they will get along, and admits that she is pleased to meet the Beastman. Luca and Syrup respond by officially introducing themselves. Then she gets down to business and asks what he is looking for today. Deep inside, Luke Marvel rejoices at his luck. He has already found a way to meet her even before the academic term begins, something he never even dared to dream of. He asks her to simply show him everything she would recommend herself, maybe some beauty regimen or perhaps another convenient thing. The open request inspires Akari and she enthusiastically agrees. He promises to show him everything. Keeping her word, she starts the tour with a smile and her witty comments accompany every exhibit. First, she shows a magical hair dryer. After some time, Luca emerges from his shopping spree. He bought almost everything he was shown. He beams and declares that he has shot himself a bunch of cool things and thanks Akari for her help. After that, he turns his attention to Syrup and asks if there is anything she would like to take for herself. Syrup looks stunned and replies that she apparently does not need anything. Her hesitation is just a mask for her true feelings. Inside, she thinks, since they so rarely go shopping together, she will be happy with a gift from him. As if on command, Akari steps forward and presents a small box, asking what Syrup thinks about the red choker inside. Syrup's eyes widen in surprise as she looks at the gift and thinks it is wonderful. She expresses gratitude but immediately turns to Luke, objecting. After all, she is just a servant and cannot accept such a gift. Ignoring her refusal, he looks at her with a calm face and declares that they will take it. Then he extends the box to her. He explains that it is a sign of his gratitude for all the care she gives him, and then quietly and carefully asks if he was mistaken in thinking that she likes it. He watches as Syrup, after a moment of hesitation, raises her gaze and meets his with a sly, indulgent smile. She quietly mutters that it can't be helped and decides to accept his gift. She turns her back to him and fastens the choker around her neck. Her face is still hidden from his gaze, but she asks for his opinion. She looks straight again. The red choker fits perfectly. Akari, watching from the side, exclaims that it suits her very well. Syrup herself, smiling contentedly, thinks that it is simply wonderful. Then she immediately turns to Luke and asks how she looks. He replies a faint blush appears on his cheeks, that the choker really emphasizes her beautiful white hair. His compliment causes Syrup to have a radiant smile with closed eyes. Lucas watches her and slowly smiles himself, thinking how lucky he is that she likes it. After she finished shopping, Akari escorts him to the carriage. She says the trip was extremely pleasant and expresses hope that he will continue to come to her as a client. When the carriage sets off, he looks intently out the window and involuntarily thinks, doing this from time to time is probably not such a bad idea. While the coach rolls through the city, his thoughts drift to the future. He realizes, next year he will have to leave home and go to the academy, and decides that before that he needs to get to know the world a little. Later, returning to his room, he decides, before leaving home, he needs to resolve one personal matter to meet the reason why his former self eventually became a disgusting, fat little frog. Lying in bed, he throws his arms to the sides in frustration. He thinks, it seems he has already hit the cause, but this is a real hassle. Still, he decides what must be done. He understands that the lazy path is not an easy one. The contrast with the stars emphasizes the mystery surrounding the physical condition of Luke Disgustos. On one side, his current swollen, unhealthy face surrounded by images of frogs and crude tools. On the other, his former sharp, healthy features framed by elegant perfume bottles. One thought has long been gnawing at him, a deep change in his face and figure. He looks at his reflection and wonders how he could have changed so drastically. He recalls, at first he was so composed, and because of that the current state is even harder to understand. Questions whether a simple hedonistic lifestyle could be the real cause. He has already checked the version of allergies or weak constitution but found no answers. The products in this world are the same as anywhere else, so he has hit a dead end. A new thought bursts into his mind. Maybe Karen knows something. He focuses on the details of cooking, on the nuances of the process and ingredients. Relying on this idea, he consults with Karen. She gives testimony and nervously notes her conclusions. The ingredients he described, she says, have properties almost exclusively related to toxins. Luke considers what he heard. Yes, toxins can be used in medicine, but they can also be used to alter the body's function or even make everything deadly depending on how exactly they are applied. She speaks and his expression hardens. If toxins are involved, this might finally explain the strange change in his appearance. The main clue is definitely worth checking. The investigation leads him to Syrup and he asks her about childhood. She recalls, until the age of 4 he was a sweet child, ate a lot and slept. Besides tender skin, she insists there was nothing physically unusual about him. She continues the story and explains. After that, his condition was unstable for about a year and only began to noticeably improve around his 6th birthday. She was shocked when, during the festive lunch on his birthday, he suddenly fell right when he was feeling well. Luke interrupts and says that he simply ran out of mana then, so he collapsed from overexertion. He insists on details and asks who cooked his food then. Syrup replies that there was a head chef, but he was forced to resign immediately after that very lunch. Since then, all cooking duties have passed to the senior butler. Found the answer. Entering the room, he greeted the chief steward. He was sitting tied to a chair, his head completely wrapped in bandages. The steward flinched in surprise. He began the interrogation, explaining that he had thought a lot. He asked the captured steward why he, Luke, became known as the vile fat froglet. He reasoned that under normal circumstances he would never have ended up like this. And he coldly thanked the man for preparing his food every day. He casually flopped back onto the large, soft, slippery mass and used it as a pillow. Then he continued his thought aloud, grumbling that his food, unfortunately, never suited him. Leaning almost close to the frightened man, he himself drew out the answer. It was about someone poisoning him. The servant immediately broke out in a heavy sweat and his breath caught in his throat. The court steward panicked at the scream and confessed that his duties were entrusted to him by the head of the Disgusto's family. Luke calmly clarified whether this meant he was acting on his father's orders. He continued his line of reasoning, assuming that his family did not know he could use healing magic to neutralize the poison. He pondered it was probably not easy for the overseer after all. He not only refused to die but began to recover. And he decided no one was indifferent enough to dirty their own hands. His eyes narrowed when he threw the final, direct accusation. He asked the manager if he had poisoned his food. The man only choked on his words and could not form a single coherent sentence. Stewart immediately broke down. He bowed his head and begged for forgiveness. Luke looked at him, amazed that he confessed so quickly. He believed that immediate surrender was a boring answer, and he admitted if the deceased had resisted, he would have sought more revenge. Then he said he would forgive, but there was a condition in his tone. When the steward asked fearfully what he planned to do, Luke clarified he would not kill him. Instead, the man would become a test subject for his magic. Stretching out his hand, he began to form a complex magical seal in the air and announced that it would be only a small punishment. He finishes the spell and pronounces the sentence on the captive leader, the gift of laziness. The old man finds himself in a merciless vortex of dark energy. His hands are magically bound before him and his consciousness fades. Looking back at the consequences, he with detached curiosity notes how his magic affected the person. The servant's eyes are now empty without will. Now the butler calmly sits in the high-backed chair and Luke orders him to leave and says that he can return to his duties. Clarity about his further path descends upon the young master. His thoughts converge on the true architect of the conspiracy, the one he considers his real enemy, his own father, Duke Disgustos. The reason is that his father might be indifferent to the liberation of ordinary servants, but direct confrontation would only cause unnecessary problems, so his strategy is not removal but incapacitation. Like pieces on a game board, he will simply disable his father's pawns, leave him on the field, but so that he cannot act against them. Later, while he is walking through the estate, Syrup approaches him. She asks where he has been and he brushes her off with a non-committal answer, saying he just stepped out for a short while. She presses on, stating her assumption that he will attend the academy and asks if he had planned otherwise. With a slight spark in his eyes, he throws the question back at her. Would she be glad to hear that he is, after all, going? She gathered herself together but is glad. Syrup expresses a desire to stay with him. Luke then explains his hesitation. Attending the academy carries a real risk of being killed, so avoiding it is quite reasonable. He admits that his path is already chosen, and with the academy will come separation from her. That is why he stretched every moment of his remaining time ahead. When his hand gently rests on her head, a calm expression settles on Syrup's face. She reaches a silence of decision. After the safety of her home was broken, she has no other choice. She will have to act alone to preserve the peaceful, measured life she values so much. A grand strategy ripened in Luca's mind. He would act from the shadows, subtly pushing the main heroes of the story. His goal was to ignite the inevitable conflict between the royal family and the nobility at the right moment, so that in the whirl of this quarrel his father, Duke Disgustos, would be crushed. He admitted that this had to be the simplest way to survive, but it did not change the fact that his transformation made him a complex character. Still, he found a shred of satisfaction because he ended up in the world of a game he truly loved. His pensive expression hardened into pure determination. He refused to just sit and allow himself to be killed. Gaining new zeal, he decided to fully embrace the role of Luke Disgustos and play it to the fullest. Exactly 1 year later came the day of his departure. While the carriage waited, Syrup whispered to him at last, "Pull yourself together." He confidently assured her and, shifting his gaze to the massive round platforms in front of the entrance to Alessida's Royal Academy, moved forward. He carefully examined everything while the instructor announced. The entrance exam would consist of 3 trials: magic, practical skills, and subject tests. He stood among the other candidates and recalled, scholarships were given to the best in each subject regardless of who they were, so he decided not to try too hard to avoid standing out. The girl next to him spoke up and declared her disgust for the decent beast man. His attention was drawn to a group standing near the spot marked for the practical exam. Among them was a girl with distinct cat ears. She seemed to notice his gaze and barely flinched. He watched as she entered the dueling grounds, and suddenly recognition flashed across his face, taking his breath away instantly. He recognized her immediately. She was the adventurer Ruby, a human beast with green hair and emerald eyes. She was one of the heroines of the game. The practical exam has just started, and Ruby sprang into action, almost instantly closing the distance and delivering a loud, powerful kick to the burly instructor. She kicked with incredible speed. The blow muffled with a sharp crash against the instructor's guard, and waves of force scattered in the air. The instructor wondered how the beast man's strength and such extraordinary techniques came together in this. When the last spark flared in the Ruby match, a new name was called: Luke Hugolo Disgustos. From the side, Lucas watched. Now everything was just beginning to unfold. Good, just as he managed to take a step forward, they were already testing another candidate. The boy with 2 colored hair held the test slime. It immediately lit up. The examiner called his power elemental magic, and the boy only sighed and summoned pain. His everyday complaint was interrupted by a huge explosion of raw magical power. The stone floor of the exam hall was completely destroyed. The incredible destructive force made a nearby girl scream that it was enough, because the next candidate was already being called. From afar, Ruby watched the aftermath with a comically attentive look. A light, intriguing smile froze on her face. When the practical exams ended, the instructor was on the floor, broken to the edge. Luke looked around, trying to understand where the lively beastman girl had gone. He noticed her humming something to herself as she walked away and decided that they would probably see each other again at school. The next day, Cyro showed Luke his results. His performance was simply wonderful, incredible exam scores, so there was no one and nothing to fear failure. Now an official student, he walked around the academy grounds in his new uniform. With the protagonist of the game world now also a student, Luke stood confidently. It was time to launch the simulation of adult love strategy. Dressed in a sharp new school uniform, Luke repels the gazes of those admiring his reflection. To himself, he admits, now he is handsome, a star contrasting with his former self. Just as he is about to leave, Syrup says the carriage is ready, and her thoughts reveal excitement about his transformation. Today his new life begins. His ultimate goal is Alessida's Royal Academy, the oldest and most prestigious institution in the kingdom. He knows this is the stage where all kinds of ideas and motives intersect. Almost all the nobles are present. Recently, the academy began accepting the most talented commoners to recruit more students. This diverse student community is necessary because the kingdom suffers from dungeons from which monsters constantly emerge. Therefore, training in proper self-defense through combat, magic, and general disciplines is considered a mandatory part of their education. Besides combat training, the academy also functions as a research center with special attention to the development of magic. Even legendary mages can teach here. Two key mechanics of this game are leveling up your own stats and interacting with love interests. The stories and characters you encountered influenced not only what happened but also who you became, and to reach the desired route, you had to carefully control which events or flags triggered. The rules are done with, and he managed to cement the strategy. He will play the role of the villain, Luke, who is always beside the protagonist. From that position, he will use knowledge from a past life to support the hero from the shadow sand. Most importantly, avoid the usual routes where Luke dies. However, he knew his path could already be doomed to develop quite differently than in the game. For now, he was no longer that fat, ugly toadstool he was supposed to be. His determination had hardened. He had to survive it for the sake of those who cared about him. This order was given to them just before leaving. Syrup asked if he remembered everything. He smiled and confirmed that he did, thanked her for preparing everything, but anxiety froze on her face. Anxiety was felt in the air. She complained that she wanted to enter the academy as his maid, to clean his room, but a foolish prohibition stood in the way. Maids cannot differ in age from their ward by more than 2 years. Luke mentally noted, over these years her sense of duty had only strengthened. She listened as Luca squeezed her hands and explained the academy rules. Students could attend classes, but there was a strict age requirement, and Syrup was 7 years older than him, so unfortunately she did not qualify. He said he would be glad to have her, but simply could not keep her. He admitted that for this very reason young children are often assigned an escort about their age, but honestly confessed he had no one like that. Her face filled with anxiety. She voiced whether the servant assigned by the Duke would manage and noted, Luca always did everything at his own pace. He tried to calm her and insisted that everything would be resolved. He smiled, letting her know that he could handle himself, and he added that Karen was also at the academy. That was somewhat reassuring. Her determination did not waver. With pain and firmness in her gaze, she said directly that she wanted to be the one to take care of him. His gaze softened as he looked at their joined hands. He remembered Syrup had been watching over him since he was very little, and he quietly thanked her. He remembered his past. His family never showed him love or warmth, but she completely filled that emptiness. For him, she was his only one. And only family. She had always been his only companion and caretaker, and recently had taken on more and more responsibilities. He realized it would be hard for her ahead without him. With sudden determination, he called her name. He sharply pressed her to himself, hugging tightly, and hid his face in her hair. He said that she had done more for him than he could ever repay, and promised someday he would definitely repay her. She pressed her whole body against him, holding tightly with her hands on the back of his uniform, while he confidently declared that he would surely keep his promise. The old sweet liquid in the last embraced the farewell presses with emotions. He says he will miss her, and she tearfully replies the same. He leaves, orders her to take care of the house while he is gone, swears to return by the end of the year, and asks her to endure this pause. She immediately agrees. After exchanging farewells, his horse-drawn carriage departs from the estate. Covering the path through the city, he thinks, now they will not be together, but this separation will only make him value Syrup even more later. He decides to count the days until his return. He recalls the promise he made just minutes ago. As soon as he finishes training and leaves the territory, she must go with him. Syrup was embarrassed and admitted that she thought she had no prospects, but he firmly stated he would never let her go. Her surprise vanished, giving way to clarity. She promised that she would not leave him for a moment, but added a condition. Karen must agree to this. He smiled, glad to hear her determination. Then he took another step forward and proposed that they become a real family. The idea suddenly threw Syrup off balance, but her shock quickly melted, giving way to pure joy when she agreed. Watching her sincerely shine, he thought she was so sweet and admitted to himself he loves her. Leaving home and memories, he reaches the academy. A gloomy figure in a hood bows, wishing him a good stay. He waves back and walks through the huge gates, ready to start a new chapter of his life on the main street of the academy. Near the reception area Dora, where he is to meet other new students, a young woman in glasses approaches. He barely hears a feeling of familiarity as she politely asks if she can call him Luxama. She apologizes for the late appearance and gives her name Labura Glico. She says she is 15 and that she is the daughter of Baron Malsaglico, director of the Ministry of Magic, and that she recognized him immediately by her father's description. His connection is impressive. She is the daughter of Malson. Libera explains her father defined her as his servant and guard, but now this connection overturns everything. She notes that he is the only one who calls her father Malson. And Luke, recalling how Malsa and Morsky are connected, insists. Libera demands that he drop all respectful forms of address and simply call her Libera. He looks closely at his new servant and asks if she likes magic. He says that her father, Malson, told him so. Liberg's face shines with genuine delight. She declares that she adores it and her most cherished dream is to get a job at the Ministry of Magic. He asks why that could be a problem and she explains. People often get annoyed when girls want to get into the ministry. Without flinching, he looks her straight in the eyes and confidently says he knows she is capable of achieving her goal. He continues to encourage her and adds that she is talented and works hard on magic, so she will definitely succeed. Libera is noticeably moved by his unexpected support. She beams with a smile, closes her eyes with joy, and expresses sincere thanks. Her gratitude quickly turns into fiery determination as she declares that she wants to become closer to him. He doubts it and she explains, since things are like this, she wants to take care of him. Luke waves it off, says he can manage on his own, and at the same time wonders why she is so drawn to him. Her gaze instantly changes to merciless focus. Covering her mouth with her hand, she looks intently at him and declares, his magic is an art, and this deep awareness finally reaches her. Suddenly he remembers that he knows about her from the gaming world. Libera is a magic maniac. Her obsession with magic hits limits and often goes too far, which causes her to create problems and earn a reputation. He was a character you could only meet when you raised your magic stat. Realizing this, he decides it is best to change the subject. He suggests they first finish the dormitory application and talk about magic later, but Libera waves her hand, saying the documents are already ready. Her straightforwardness makes him wonder if she is rushing too much. She suggests they find a place that serves tea to have the conversation. Settling in a cafe, Luke inhales the fragrant steam from the cup and agrees, noting that this tea is the best for talking about magic. With his permission, she asks to immediately move to her own opinion about his original spell. He, sipping tea, thanks her for always sending this wonderful mix and says, continue. She immediately dives into analysis, starting with practical applications of attributeless magic. Her enthusiasm quickly grows. She energetically makes gestures with her hands, reverently repeating the phrase attributeless magic again and again. Looking at her, Luke silently doubts whether her deep interest is a result of Tommelsan's influence. She listened as Libera finished the assessment, and academic passion burned in her eyes. In a word, she believed that the potential of Val was limitless. Although she was already well versed in this topic, she still thought, there's plenty of room for improvement. He slowly sipped his drink and pondered, Libera will become a great research partner. Her enthusiasm was contagious, just like her father's. She stated that she eagerly looks forward to seeing what he will propose. A lively discussion continued, and outside at the table, both sat immersed in a shared passion for magic. After some time, she noticed it was almost time for the main event of the day and suggested they set off. They got up from their seats and headed to their destination. They reached the Great Hall of Magic Academy, a huge amphitheater already packed with students for the induction ceremony. Looking over the crowd from the balcony, he began to recognize faces from the game. All the key players had gathered in one place. His observation was interrupted by a sudden overwhelming wave of sensation that engulfed him completely. Above the crowd below hung an intense, hostile aura compressed the space and surged from a single point, from Sword Emperor. The young man's gaze sharply soared upward and fixed directly on Luca's position. A thin smile slid across his lips as a thought formed in his mind. I see, here. He stubbornly stared back and anxiety surged like a wave until he had no idea if he was noticed. The Sword Emperor's gaze was defiant and a sinister premonition descended upon him. The gaze of Sword Emperor pierces him like a beam. Luke responds with an even, unshaken glow in his eyes. Inside, he notes, this is probably their first meeting, but the fire and focus of that boy hint at an already existing connection. At Grand Galley, Libera Glico asks Luca to tell what happened, aloud wondering why some student stares at him as if he were his sworn enemy. Libera recognizes the boy, it's Dan, the knight apprentice. Luca recalls that the Marshall family leads the enemy noble faction, so they are enemies by birth. Libera adds she heard Dan is exceptionally skilled in martial arts. She internally recalls more and more details from the game's lore. Dana's rating is growth and the energy of Legion of House Marshals. Libero remembers that Lijun is the protagonist's childhood friend and a potential marriage candidate on the standard Night Road route. She is a devoted heroine whose love for the protagonist makes her endearing. Thoughts continue. She considers another option, a path where Luke captures Lijun makes her his wife and enemy, whom he will then have to fight. Libera considers this clash the brightest and reflects to herself. Lijun's pure, devoted nature ultimately becomes her downfall. She also recalls Dan, a commoner who managed to enter the academy as Lijun's escort because his late father was a respected knight. Because of this story, Dan strives to continue his father's work and become a knight of House Marshall, fueling his hatred for the disgust those relatives evoke in him. Luke notices how Dan stares at him with a heavy, overly vigilant gaze and shudders inside. He feels the boy will most likely come for him. But the attention quickly shifts when the valedictorian speech is announced, and a girl named Irina Shiley Bordelcetos is called to the stage. Irina is introduced as the first princess of the kingdom. Luke says she is a first-year representative, and Labura complains that school life is so boring. When Luke asks if he is interested in the princess, Labura brushes off the thought. She admits that Irina is beautiful but explains, thanks to her sister Iris, she is used to beauties, and even in the game Irina did not interest her. He tells her that the most important thing is that he already has a fiancée whom he loves, and with two people he needs to be careful about, he cannot relax his vigilance. Then he asks Labura if she minds if he lies down for a nap and pulls out a large, fluffy pillow. He suggests talking about everything later. Labura smiles and agrees, sounds simply wonderful. The ceremony continues. Luke peacefully sleeps on his pillow. Labura gently watches him. After some time, she quietly wakes him and says the ceremony is over and all the other students have already left. Labura recognizes his pillow, with interest the very one rumored about. He confirms that it is indeed the one and with a smile says, his father once told him that when they first met, he was floating on this. He calls Labura a beautiful girl and suggests letting her ride it sometime, insisting the feeling is simply wonderful. She thanks him, saying she appreciates people who honestly talk about their interests, but her mood immediately sours. She clenches her fists and complains that they still have orientation ahead. Saying she has to leave, Luke suddenly takes her hand. Labura is completely flustered and babbles that she has never held a boy's hand before. Luke just replies that it's nothing scary, blushes, and she notices how soft his palm is. He grins boldly and declares that he must take responsibility for stealing her first time and offers to escort her to their class. As they walk away holding hands, Lijun Marshall watches them from afar. Her face hardens with anger. She trembles slightly and mutters, "Weakling." Libero, shocked by the accusation, sharply turns and shouts that they are doing nothing, while Luke calmly tries to calm her down. Labura asks Luke if he is angry about that early clash, but he brushes off the very thought. He says there is no point wasting energy on it, better to spend it talking with her. Clearly shining, Labura agrees. He also enjoys their conversations. They decide to quickly finish everything as soon as they enter the huge auditorium designated for Class 0. Libera notes that everyone is already in place and that they can freely choose their seats. In front of the room, a man with long dark hair introduces himself as their teacher Glorn Research. Luke immediately swears he recognizes him from the game. Then the assistant teacher is named a woman named Silas. Luke notes to himself, she is hundreds of years old and is the most complicated romance interest that can be hunted in the game store. Another student, Muriel, an ordinary poor girl on a scholarship, explains to the class that status means nothing at the academy. They will be judged only by their abilities. Hearing this, Lijun Marshall raises her hand and asks how exactly their rank and opportunities will be determined. The teacher thanks her for the excellent question. In response, Glorin dramatically reveals a new invention, Magic Watch. He orders the students to direct mana at it. When Luke does this, his watch emits a bright flash of light. The teacher explains that this invention records their unique signature and allows checking grades and ranking. Looking at the display, Luke recognizes it as a stat screen from the game. It shows his name, age, level, and class. Understanding that detailed statistics are private, while overall ratings for instructors are public information, he pulls out last year's ratings. Then Arena took first place overall, and Ruby held the highest position in practical skills. Continuing the review, he sees Labura is first in magic, Muriel is first in learning, and he himself is second. Glorin, noticing what he focused on, asks his opinion and proudly declares that magical tools are the best resource for the progress of humanity. Luke turns back to ask Liburu about the grades, but she looks distracted, calls their teacher a magical maniac, and mutters that he still doesn't understand they are the same. The classroom buzzes with life and Sela steps forward. Declares that the cool time is over, and now she will talk about academy life. She addresses the students and says their progress is their responsibility and ranks are not just for show. With this comes a stern warning: if grades fall, they will be mercilessly demoted to a lower class. But at the end, she adds, there is one exception. She calls one exceptional award Sword Emperor Cup. The assistant lecturer explains, even if a student has weak grades in magic and academic subjects, a strong performance in this prestigious tournament will allow them to remain in the upper classes. This is the most important event of the academy. It is held every year and the whole world is captivated by it. She outlines the reward for victory: to become an honorary knight and rise in ranks to nobilitia status with great privileges. Within the school system, training matches called ranked battles are allowed around the cup. While she summarizes the rules of these clashes, Luke listens and recognizes the system. Lower-ranked students can challenge those higher up, and the challenged have no right to refuse. The winner takes the opponent's rank and is transferred to the corresponding class. However, the loser cannot challenge the same person again for 6 months, and after 5 defeats by the same opponent, they permanently lose the right to compete with them. He is fully aware these rules were set exactly as in the Gamito Force, a clash between him, the villain, and Dan, the main hero. Luca's assigned role is to be the first to be defeated in the ranked battle. This is a necessary event to cement their doomed rivalry. While Luca contemplates, Dan once again reaffirms his goal to win the cup and become an honorary knight. His intentions are firm. Dan raises his hand and asks when the ranked fights can start. Silas says, as soon as they register on their watches immediately. Without a second's hesitation, Dan declares that he intends to issue a challenge right now. He rises from his seat, points across the hall, and roars his challenge. Luke Higelo immediately recoils disgustedly. Hit me. The challenge immediately flashes on Luke's watch. Essentially, the duel has officially started. From the spot, the main character of the game watches carefully and understands. This is a training fight. Luke turns to his opponent and grimly agrees with his role, acknowledging that this is the first task the noble villain assigned. The clash reflects a key training fight from the game. In that original story, Luke, although trained thanks to his exceptional talent in magic, was defeated by Dan the Knight Apprentice. This defeat ignited in the original Luke a thirst for revenge, and he relentlessly targeted Dan thereafter. Luke stayed in the background, gnashing his teeth, trapped by his own resentment, while Dana managed to live a full school life at the academy, earning the favor and friendship of those around her. He calls it an original plot, and the proud nobleman raises a storm up to frenzy when some commoner summons him. But this Luke is different. Disdainfully waving his hand, he stubbornly declares that he will not do this. The refusal caught Dan by surprise. He was sitting and looking completely indifferent. Luke says he has seat number 2 and asks what Dan's position is. Dan interprets this disappointed, indifferent attitude as cowardice and shouts back, accusing him of fear. He calmly dismisses the accusations, explaining that he does not want to fight an idiot who cannot understand a simple situation. He emphasizes, as long as Dan has a chance to raise his rank, he himself has nothing to gain. In response, Dan screams that his rank is 20. Nearby, Lysian Marshall is seething with anger and declares that he will not allow this. He lunges forward sharply to confront Luke directly. She demands an answer as to why he is not fighting and shouts that as a nobleman of their glorious country, accepting the challenge is completely obvious for him. Her fiery lecture seems to short-circuit when she stops and rethinks. She mumbles that she knows he is still a somewhat problematic hothead, but his grades are good. Glancing embarrassedly, she suddenly seems to decide not to get involved. She turns around and walks away, brushing off the whole story as too troublesome. While leaving, Lucas inside repeats his credo again. To get involved directly contradicts his principle of laziness. He wants to help only from behind the scenes. At that very moment, a new voice cuts in. Irina Alessida steps forward and says she sincerely wants to see the two fight. She emphasizes the tough opposition, Dan with his excellent practical score against Disgustos with an excellent magical one. Her gaze fixes on Luke. She calmly says, refusing the duel will only lower his rank, and even more directly appeals to his position. A nobleman from this country should lead people and demand that he strictly adhere to the academy's rules. Her persistence is incredibly irritating. She stands before him, unwavering, and declares it is his duty and he cannot refuse the duel because she will not allow it. She presses on, citing their words, in the academy status means nothing, only grades matter. Logic drove him into a dead end. He bursts out with a heavy sigh, refusing both the princess and the duke's daughter is too much trouble. Inside, he admits how much he hates Princess Irina while Libera Glicko watches, worried. The heavy feeling of doom, he finally gives in. "You are right, Princess." His words reach Dan. He watches from afar next to Lysian Marshall. Inside, Dan thinks Luke is too weak to oppose the predetermined course of events alone. Resigned to fate, Luke walks through the academy grounds. Nearby towers a grand coliseum. Behind him quietly floats the slug Val, who complains, saying there is no choice, but it is still pure torment and he would rather not move so much. Walking alongside Libera and Dan, he plans the next step. To play his role properly, he knows he must lose the duel, but exactly how he is not sure. Val senses his anxiety, flies up next to him and asks if he is okay. Libera turns to him and says she heard he does not like training. Then she offers everything she knows about his opponent. Dan is a knight student from the Marshall Dougal house, a family of famous fighters, and his exam results show he is already well accustomed to fights. He responds to her information with a sudden, confident smile. Turning to Val, he reassures the slug that everything is fine and declares, for him, it will be a piece of cake. The sharp and complete change in his behavior throws Libera off balance. Her eyes widen behind her glasses, flashing with the sparkle of new admiration for his unexpected confidence. She said that Luke is truly a mysterious person. He invented magic that no one else could imagine, but still refuses to fight despite his noble status. Luke just listened, asking if that was true. She quickly assured him that she meant it as a compliment. When Luke asked what inventing magic and refusing to fight had to do with it, she explained, "Nobles place too high a value on their own pride." He smiled and replied that if so, then all is well. He added that he does not want Libera to hate him, a comment that completely confused her. When her composure was shattered, she sharply denied the very possibility and, shouting, insisted she would never stop loving him. While they were walking, their opponents Dan and Lysian Marshall marched ahead with grim determination. Their gazes were fixed forward. Their path led to a huge coliseum known as the Arena. Luke remarked that he hadn't set foot in this place since the entrance exam. Inside, the proctor stepped onto the sand and looked around. Their classmates had gathered in the stands to watch the first ranking match. Luke sat motionless and Dane began stretching, preparing for the fight. He turned to Luke and declared that he intended to kill his rotten nature in form. Dan accused him of being lazy during the exam, but Luke only told the worried worker to wait calmly, without any emotion, despite the threat. The opponent's rage was met with an indifferent snort. Luke told Dan not to ignore him and just be grateful at least that he agreed to fight at all. Taunt worked. Dan demanded that Luke state his level, explaining, "This number increases when you defeat monsters." Luke calmly replied that since this was a game, he immediately, as soon as he saw it, maxed it out and didn't think about it anymore because strategy and basics are more important. Calmly standing on his feet, he looked Dan in the eyes and Dan just froze, confused. When Luke clarified that his level was only 1, Dan's eyes sharply widened in disbelief. His disbelief quickly turned to rage. Clenching his fist, he thundered that Luke was worse than he imagined and asked how a nobleman could have never fought a monster even once. Ignoring this outburst of emotion, the voices of the two proctors echoed through the arena. He solemnly introduced Challenger Dan and the higher-ranked defender, Luke Hugelo Disgustos, then ordered them to step forward. In response, Dan gripped his sword with both hands, his gaze fixed firmly on his opponent, filled with rage and determination. Lucas, on the other hand, looked completely calm. He indifferently wished him a good fight. His face lit up with concentration as he waited for the signal to start the ranking match. When the proctor roared, announcing the start of the match, Dan instantly rushed into attack. Luke simply called Val his slug companion. He thought to himself, in the game before, he himself delivered strikes with selected teams, but this reality gave no hints. Finally, Luke concluded there was only one option left. Dan's blade crashed down on him. He gave Val a simple command, take full control for 1 minute, and he also asked for slime to protect them both from serious injuries. He reasoned that after he regained consciousness, he would simply surrender. The slippery lump instantly flowed, fused with the blade, and deflected Dan's strike with a sharp clatter. Dan froze in shock, and Luke, his eyes now burning with a different light, spoke with Val's intention. "I'm counting on you." His opponent stood frozen in complete confusion, gripping the sword convulsively in a defensive stance. The figure of Luke, now controlled by Val, loomed with a confident, eerie smile. A moment later, Luke blinked, groaning as he came to. He looked at his hand and was bewildered. A strange substance covered it. Before him, Dan's figure was dissolving into oblivion. The duel he had just awakened from began with a strange, neutralizing touch. While the sabers clashed below, the body of Luke Disgustos, controlled by someone else, simply extended a hand and placed Dan's palm on his forehead. Dan, stunned, demanded to be released. With stubborn focus, the creature controlling Luke clenched its fist. Somewhere in the distance, the duel continued. The clang of steel echoed through the arena. Dan, however, was sweating the whole time, and thoughts raced one after another. He noticed, as ordered, his opponent was not seriously wounded. Dan believed that no matter what happened, Luke would eventually use his secret attribute magic to win, so Dan could not lose this arranged duel. The opponent had other plans. He lunged forward and shouted aloud, "Enough, end this." He moved with unnatural speed, touched Dan's forehead again, and uttered a single command, "Sleep." Dan tried to break free, tensed his muscles, and activated the boost ability, but it was already too late. The boy's thoughts were cold and precise. He recognized in Dan's magic the attribute magic boost, a hint that accelerated his strengthening magic, but he also saw, due to Dan's inexperience, it was not yet working very effectively. He continued the assessment and concluded, since Dan had poor magical endurance, he would not resist the sleep spell. A strange thought flashed in his mind. Although he did not play the role to lose, if the villain won, it would be bad for him. He writhed, struggling against the magic that was coming, but his body did not obey. He realized he needed to find a way to outsmart them and somehow save the situation while the crowd watched. Luxian Marshall exclaimed in alarm, and rightly so. His desperate struggle did not go unnoticed by the spectators. Proctor froze in horror and stared wide-eyed as a huge white mass burst from Luca, covering Dan and lifting him into the air as if in hands. Proctor's voice sharply cut through the stunning silence of the arena and declared Luke the winner. He begged him to stop just to release Dan from his jelly-like prison. Proctor's announcement hangs in the air as Dan's body thuds heavily against the stone floor. Luxian Marshall looks on in complete disbelief, eyes wide with shock, and shouts his name. Her shock quickly turns to rage. She kneels beside her fallen comrade, glares at Luke, and screams, calling him scum. She demands to know where his noble pride is and accuses him of humiliating the victor when Dan was already unconscious. He does not take his eyes off her flash at all. With a cold, steady gaze, he says that first and foremost he did not want to fight. Dan was the one who provoked the confrontation, so he concludes Dan must have been ready for such an outcome. Then his gaze rises from Dana and Luxian and glides over the silent spectators in the stands. He addresses everyone and declares that he will now accept any challenge for a ranked match. A bold prank momentarily throws Luxian off track. Then he raises his hand to his forehead, portraying fatigue, as if to say, since he must be exhausted, this is a great chance for any contender daring to challenge him. He scans the crowd, asking if anyone will agree to the deal. Silence is his only answer. No one steps forward, and he grimaces boldly. While he has their attention, he will teach them all an important lesson. Sitting in his seat, Libera Glico, attentively, with a serious expression on his face, watches what is happening. He begins the lesson and says that he respects the intelligent and those who dedicate themselves to the pursuit of magic. Then he adds that he fiercely hates fools who rely only on brute force, disdainfully waving his hand toward the unconscious Dan on the ground, and declares, if any other barbarian like this dares to challenge him, he will do everything so that they can never challenge him again. His fist clenches, a quiet, cruel promise that reinforces the threat. In the stands, Irina, Elicidas, and other students watch, their faces a mix of anxiety and admiration. Luke mockingly despises those standing aside over his defeated opponents Dan and Luxian. He thinks his ominous fame will now surely spread throughout the class, though he wishes no one would challenge him again, accepting that such injustice is simply the usual order of the world. His thoughts are interrupted by Luxian Marshall. She clenches her fist in anger. She vows to defeat Dan and orders him to remember her words. When she storms out loudly, Luke, standing next to Liberglico, quietly asks what that was and wonders if he should have kept his thoughts to himself. Dan sharply falls onto the stone floor. Valslime rushes forward to catch him and soften the impact. Luke covers his mouth and reproaches himself for his own laziness and for not intervening earlier. Dan addresses the fallen Dan and says, "It is a waste of effort to study magic if you are so easily shaken by movement." Luke declares that any further explanations will be useless and dismisses Dan as a fool who understands only his own justice. That he says enough. Liber agrees with him and asks if he is ready to leave. He is silent and his face becomes gloomy and detached. His thoughts are broken by the appearance of Princess Irina Elicidas. She addresses him and confirms this is indeed Luke and her classmate. He acknowledges his identity and asks what she wants from him. She notes that he is the only one who looks at her with such an expression. Inside, she notes, their compatibility is terrible. She thinks that as a commoner he will never understand her. Then she recalls how her older brother, Testa, told her about him and realizes that they are in the same group. Her facial expression softens slightly as she formally acknowledges that he is from the Disgusto's family. She thanks him for the wonderful fight he showed. She nods, turns to leave, and says that this is all she came for. As she walks away, Libera asks what that was. Luke looks down, a single tear falls, and he quietly whispers that he cannot be forgiven. Libera smiles brightly, tells him not to worry about what he is saying there. Then she cheerfully adds that their first day at school was definitely very exhausting. He found Karen on the balcony overlooking the estate at night and asked what she was doing there. He advised her to rest a little. She turned to him with a radiant smile, and the table next to her had already been cleared of food. She admitted that she was incredibly pleased. It had been so long since she tasted his dishes, and now she was completely full. She also added that she was glad about how he felt and that she put her all into cooking for him. Tracy shuddered at her own words. She further said that the best thing to nourish him is her kitchen and jokingly warned, don't praise her too much or she will lose her measure. He smiled and assured her if she did it, everything would be fine, especially considering her numerous successful business projects. She gave him everything and he modestly corrected, said he only gave a few pieces of advice. She looked at him with wide-open eyes and insisted, his support is the very foundation of the success of House Caribbean. She asked if he was just trying to praise her and that his modesty almost becomes a problem. He simply replied that it suited him, explaining, when the wealth of House Caribbean increases, he also gets richer. She laughed and remarked that only a nobleman would say such a thing. Her playful nature changed. She took his hand and asked if he was serious. He confirmed. Their clasped hands became a reminder of all the conversations they had had over the years. Leaning closer, she spoke tensely, telling how his family was indifferent to him, how he longed for a healthy life, and how he became passionate about her cooking, admitting that despite knowing everything about her, he gave her unwavering love. In a trembling, vulnerable tone, she asked, "So, Luke, am I still just your maid?" In response, he fell to his knees before her, called her the girl from the past before his engagement, and declared that even if both the Dukalski house and the Count's house fell, she was more important to him than anything. He confessed he could not live without her. He reached out his hand and asked her to stay by his side for the night. A bright, unexpected smile spread across her face, and she jokingly called him a wicked man, noting that no woman could refuse such a sincere request. Until the next morning, he carries Karen in his arms through the air, jumping from roof to roof under the morning sky. He tells her, if anyone besides Syrup sees them like this, he will do everything possible to remain unnoticed. When he lands on the stone parapet, his appearance immediately catches Dana's eye, who was just out for his morning jog. The night student shudders, seeing that someone actually gets up so early, and a member of the Disgusto's family at that. He is filled with surprise. What could someone be doing in this place at this hour? His surprise turns into suspicion as he wonders if the young nobleman is weaving something dark. His eyes widen sharply as Luke is suddenly covered by a shimmering, ethereal aura technique he recognizes as Trace. Aura shows Luke's vision in battle. He moves with captivating grace against several opponents. Dan freezes at how it looks, seamless, flowing movements, not like a fight, but rather like a masterfully choreographed dance. However, Luke recalls the fight from the other side. At first, he underestimated the opponent. He thought that a lower level guaranteed an easy victory, but later he realized that physical strength does not always depend solely on level. It turned out that the other characteristics of his enemies were incredibly high, so he had to find a way to overcome the colossal difference in their strength. The revelation about Luca's true strength hits Dan right in the chest. He clenches his fist in frustration and realizes the boy he pushed away as a spoiled noble was actually being prepared with such power that it surpassed his own. Truth stings more than any physical blow. He looks back on his path. He trained tirelessly, thought only about the fight to become a knight worthy of a battle name. He believed that this the only thing was enough, and now he understands. His current path will never lead him to Luke's level, so he can only guess what exactly he lacks in this crucial element. He looks confusedly at this vast and empty sky. He comes to the humiliating conclusion, the world is much bigger and more complex than he could ever imagine. When dawn falls on the silent bastions, he decides to think more for himself to find his own way forward. With fresh determination, he bursts into a run again. He identifies his main weakness, failure to use intellect. The strength of his body has undoubtedly grown from the fighting style, but he admits He neglected training because he lacks the structured environment of the academy, yet despite this, he is determined to change. He shouted again with renewed strength, declaring that he wanted to defeat Luke, and as he proclaimed, it would be interesting. Luke, seeing him, covered his mouth. Dan was not going to look like he could actually win, but the boy's spirit was undeniable. The night student grimaced in a smile through the bandages and shrugged off the defeat as if to say, this is just one failure. He swore, someday he would definitely surpass Luca. Then he turned and ran, admitting to himself, now Luca is too far away so you can't even see the edge. As soon as Dan left, Luca was left alone. Warm, healing light streamed from his chest. A little later in the grand dining hall of the academy, Luke and Labura prepared for breakfast. Iris was already sitting, sipping her morning tea with honey. She greeted them both warmly. She scolded Luca, saying that he needed to eat properly. While taking another sip of tea, she mentally pondered the strange contradiction, his carefree attitude despite low blood pressure. Standing before her, Iris continued to explain. Entering the academy revealed a completely different side of her older sister. It turned out she had become more attentive. Her gentle posture and manner of speaking with the nobility's elite were so praised that some even began to call her Devon. She was the center of attention at the party welcoming the freshmen. Luke remembered this event. He also had to give a speech as a representative of the freshmen, but rumors about his connection to the royal faction spread so quickly that he lost interest in what was happening. Labura suddenly cut off the conversation, apologized to Arisama, and said that her sister drinks far too much. Luke froze in surprise at this news. After that, Labura enthusiastically suggested developing a supplement that would help with low blood pressure. While they were talking, a strictly observant student passed by them. This meeting reminded Lucas his first fight at the academy had already become a widely known sensational incident. This event clearly drew political lines within the student body. The royalist faction, to which Luke now belonged, faced envy and hostility. Meanwhile, the aristocratic faction looked at them with respect and awe. At the same time, the neutral faction and the common folk simply watched with curiosity, not knowing how to behave regarding how the power relations were unfolding. He leaned back in his chair, finally sighing with relief. The impressive effect of his duel had already faded, and he felt it at least for a while. Now he definitely wouldn't be bothered, so he could finally focus on studying. His thoughts slipped to the academic program. He learned that classes are divided into two types: compulsory subjects that provide basic knowledge and electives in magic and practical skills. First thing to do was to register for courses. A broad smile spread across his face. He thought that in the game classes have their roles and characteristics are adjusted accordingly, but here it did not matter. He was free to combine his favorite items however he wanted. He immediately decided to completely bypass practical skills. Since he already had enough strength, he would rely only on magic. After all, he reasoned, deep knowledge of magic is an essential condition for a carefree life. At that moment, Libra announced that she had made a decision. She chooses magical studies and studies of magical instruments and completes the rest with basic courses. There were no more classes left for today, she suggested, setting off. Climbing the huge stairs, she cheerfully suggested going into a separate training room, explaining that it was a private space where one could study and practice magic and other skills. She continued outlining the academy system. Access to places like the arena, classrooms, and training halls was restricted by class rank, but Class 0 had priority access to all of them, so its students received the best conditions. Walking down the long corridor, she added that the student rankings were published to ignite the spirit of competition. With a focused look, she nodded toward a row of doors and announced, "This is." The doors opened into a huge, empty hall. Libera apologized for its scale and promised to add something later. In the center of this gigantic room, Karen C. Caribbean was squatting on the floor. Suddenly, a mighty force burst out of her. The stone floor beneath her knees cracked and shattered. Cracks spread in all directions until the ground sank under the incredible pressure. Her power had already broken free from the training hall. Total devastation. Trembling debris hung in the air and the walls were shattered by magic, traces of power everywhere. Against the backdrop of this ruin, Libera clapped her hands and with a theatrical gesture announced that she had restored the expanded space. Luke froze, looking surprised. He asked if this was her first time with such magic. Libera confirmed, yes. She added that this was not the kind of spell you find in books, so for someone like her who had only practiced magic at home, it was a great rarity. With a confident smile, Luke offered her a choice of teacher's items, and she immediately agreed eagerly. She waved her hand at the glowing formation on the floor and explained that it was a magic circle, although it was an ordinary thing. She further clarified it was needed to stabilize magic and to learn how to draw diagrams correctly. Otherwise, the spell would not activate. He paused for a moment, holding Val in his hand, immersed in slime. Mentally, he noted, magic is convenient but requires the same amount of effort. Without elements, it's easy to use if you're used to it, but without imagination, it immediately becomes difficult. Elemental magic, on the other hand, is initially simpler, but for any practical application, deep understanding and training are required. His analysis lit up her eyes. She declared that he probably liked it too because the topic was deep and interesting. He enthusiastically agreed. After the theoretical discussion ended, they sat at the table. Libera suggested getting down to business, starting by recording their personal data. He reviewed the document she had prepared. It listed her as Labura Glico, level 4 with the elemental attribute of water, as well as acquired skills in non-elemental life enhancement and support magic. Luke noted that water magic seemed to suit her well. She agreed and said that its versatility for both attack and support made experiments with it fun. He slid his own paper across the table and declared that it was his magic. Libera leaned forward. She had been waiting for this moment. He nudged her, let her set high demands, and confidently promised you would find plenty of applications. She took the document, and as soon as she read it, her face distorted with shocking surprise, eyes wide open, as if everything had collapsed on the spot. She whispered, stumbling, I hope this is normal. He calmly replied that this elemental magic must remain a secret, and that she should only tell others that he uses magic that affects the human body. Still digesting the revelation, she listened as Luke leaned forward with a sly smile. He asked her to keep it a secret and reassured her that everything was fine because Malson already knew and hadn't said anything. She immediately agreed, promising that she would not tell anyone about it. Valsliz also caught on, and his enthusiastic promise to keep silent sounded in unison. Her thoughts again rushed to the duel. Now she understood. The magic that Luca could use to instantly immobilize Den was a type of dream. She saw hypnotic magic in action for the first time in her life. On the other hand, he got lost in thought, impatiently waiting for his unique abilities to finally come into play. He reasoned that he liked it too. Then her attention shifted to another thing. She became interested in his immaterial magic, specifically regarding Val. After all, since primary magic is unregistered, it is impossible to analyze. He could not get rid of the thought aloud. Maybe this skill of evaluation simply takes data from the Ministry of Magic's database. She confirmed his guess and explained. For elemental magical inspection, the evaluation function must be equipped with an extremely advanced analytical capability. With a feigned sparkle, she handed over the magical watch. She explained, gathering advanced functions in such a tiny device is technically extremely difficult, but due to low mana values, it becomes possible. She added that the item is rare, and Luca's eyes lit up with impatience for his future potential in dungeons and information gathering. In class, teacher Glorin Research announces the next extracurricular activity, a mandatory event for all freshmen known as Dungeon Practice. Lysian Marshall listens, focused and collected, while Luke inside feels disgust and regrets. What a hellish nuisance this is. The teacher begins introducing the teams and their members. He announces that the leader of Team 1 is Princess Irina Alesitis. Her partners will be both the game's main character and the dark-skinned exam candidate. Seeing this, Libera Glico notes to herself, Lysian and the main character are usually together, so separating them happens very rarely. He continues the announcement and declares that Lysian Marshall will lead Team 2. Lysian accepts this confidently. Her team is shown. There are Luke, Ruby, and another girl. After this, the teacher prepares to announce Team 3. Before he can continue, Libera Glico raises her hand and addresses him. She says that as a cunning servant, she wants to join the same team. The teacher immediately refuses, explaining that they need to consider balance by level between the teams. He asks her not to worry about it and to do her best in her own team. Libera looks down, quietly makes a decision, and sees her disappointment. Luke turns to her with a gentle expression and tells her not to get hurt. While they prepare to part ways, Lysian watches them from afar. Libera adjusts her glasses and replies to Luca, saying that although she believes everything will be fine with him, he must not be careless. Students move to the neighboring room for team meetings. The teacher orders everyone to disperse into their groups and start. In her assigned room, Lysian Marshall stands with her hands on her hips and boldly introduces herself as the team leader. Next to Luke, another participant introduces herself, Muriel, a scholarship student who likes to study but honestly admits she is weak in battle. Luke silently wonders if Lysian is really as scary as she looks. Then he introduces himself, Luke Gugolo Disgustos. Next, a girl with cat ears, Ruby, cheerfully says her name and adds, since she is an active adventurer, the team can rely on her when it comes to dungeons. After the introductions, Muriel eagerly offers herself to the group. She asks if she can be their errand girl, volunteering to buy everything they might need, whether bread or juice. While the newly formed team gets acquainted, Ruby sincerely rejoices, thanks Luke and asks to be called Luke-sama. She offers him to pet her on the head. He accepts the invitation but internally struggles with the same desire to pet her cat ears. Her offer suddenly heats up when she winks and tells the three they can do whatever they want. Luke paralyses her frankness with silence just at the moment when an invisible voice growls at them. The voice belongs to a fierce listener who demands they listen properly. She reproaches them for their behavior and asks what they are doing, although they should be discussing team dynamics. Her gaze falls on Muriel and she silently makes it clear she is being scolded. Luke, caught between them, bitterly regrets how everything has become troublesome. In a moment, the group sits down and tries to take control of the meeting. Suspicions that they should take a break become increasingly clear. Ruby agrees with the idea, but Muriel spins the proposal in a completely unexpected direction. She happily offers her lap as a pillow to anyone who wants to rest. Laishan again freezes in shock at the confidence of his comrades and calls them unclean. Both Luke and Ruby politely refuse, agreeing that a pillow on the lap is too intimate for those who have just met. Angry and irritated, Laishan rejects the idea of a break and insists they must pass the final checks. She grumbles about Ruby to herself, and Luke is already despairing he will not be able to rest. Laishan replies, "This is a strategic meeting, so no one has the right to sleep." When the distraction subsides, the team begins to discuss their roles. Ruby explains that she fights with a dagger, can dodge enemies, and also uses tribute magic. Laishan confirms her position. She is a knight on the front line. Following their example, Muriel declares that she will become a shield, confidently relying on her healing magic and demonstrating her abilities with a bow. As soon as she finished explaining her role, Lucas, looking exhausted, said he wanted to sleep and she screamed in shock. Her shock quickly turned into a competitive argument. Muriel suggested carrying sleepy Luke, but Ruby interrupted her and insisted she would do it herself. Laishan, whose patience had run out, exploded at them, declaring that Luke was being carried only because they were spoiling him. Despite her outburst, the others calmly agreed to challenge the dungeon over the weekend. Ruby added that it was no big deal if Luke only moved when they were in trouble. With a sigh of irritation, Lysian declared the meeting over for today. After Laishan dismissed them, Luke was left completely confused. He did not understand why two girls were so strongly inclined towards him at the very first meeting, whether they were trying to appease him because of his ducal status. He reasoned that it would not be easy to get along with the heroines until their own problems were resolved first. He thought over the situation once more while Ruby and Muriel clung to him, unpacking goods resembling him. He decided that this was even better than being hated, but suddenly he was struck by a stunning thought. Maybe he was some kind of idol. Meanwhile, in another corner of the academy, Libera Glyco noticed Luca's group. Calling him over, she told her companion Dan that Team 1 seemed to have finished already and asked if Luca had managed to get along with the new teammates. So she approached him directly, took his hand, and asked about their conversation. Luca, without looking aside, simply replied that there was no problem, let them go. Dan stood and watched as they walked away with Libera and disappeared into the distance. A shadow of doubt flashed across his face as he wondered if Luke still harbored hatred towards him. For them, his gaze never shifted from Luca's distant backend. He always assumed that the main character would continue to hate him. "I hate him." The way Luke walks away gave Dan an unexpected realization. The protagonist's hostility completely disappeared. He stood alone, and a strange feeling washed over him as he pondered the sharp change in Luca's behavior. Meanwhile, when the weekend came, Luke and the company went into the forests and paved a path to the rank 2 Forest 2 dungeon. While they were walking, Luke explained, "This dungeon is located in the mountains behind the school. It is large, but its rating is quite low, 2 out of a maximum of 10. Primarily because students regularly hunted monsters inside, keeping their number down." Ruby explained the essence of the dungeons. These are huge complexes hunted for their resources. People enter hoping to find magical stones for monsters they are used to power magical tools. For this purpose, adventurers are sent to mow down monster populations and keep the dungeon within a manageable scale. This expedition was the result of a planning meeting where suddenly Luke began to be pampered and showered with care. Muriel and Ruby stood on either side, taking turns asking if he was tired or wanted a drink, while Libera only observed, asking if he needed anything else. Overwhelmed with attention, Luke could only insist that he F. Finally, he understood why Muriel had formed such a favorable impression of him. Even now, behind the prison walls, he pointed in that direction and ordered, "Fire an arrow." Muriel only replied. His understanding came from a conversation a few days earlier. Karen approached him and said she had a message from Muriel. She explained, Muriel was very grateful to Luke for once curing her younger brother of illness. Already processing her words, Luke caught the connection. He realized she was talking about a child from the orphanage. A confused Muriel surfaced in his memory near the conversation when Karen. Having said this, Karen continued. Since they were now on the same team, Muriel wanted to somehow repay him. She even went so far as to ask Karen, Luke's fiancée, for permission. Holding a cup of tea, Luke was surprised and asked why Karen was telling him all this. Memory fades. In the present, Muriel confidently declares that she has won. Karen's voice echoes in his head, highlighting Muriel's deep gratitude, and Muriel herself felt, thanks to Karen's intervention, she could finally relax and act. Only one creature resembling an oily form remained of the former threat. In a moment, Ruby returns and picks up the bag. She declares that she has a magical stone and that monsters are easy, they don't move. She cheerfully greets the sleeping. Luke's strategy was revealed. A wide spell, search, and auto-sleep. All the monsters around them were subdued. But this method is not to everyone's liking. Listen, her face is a mask of rage. She shouts that they don't fight. Not at all. He sighs and asks what she is so dissatisfied with, and she snaps, everything. Luke explains the plan, and honestly, he is jealous of Lyjan. She has almost nothing to do. Meryl shoots the sleeping monsters with her cyber weapon, while Ruby collects their magical stones and finishes off everything she manages to hit. Stragglers, completing her part of the plan, does not quell Lycan's anger. When she chops defenseless, sleepy creatures, a desperate scream bursts out. Why are both her squad and the monster sleeping? This is not the kind of combat practice she. Imagining her comrades in despair, Muriel steps forward with a determined face and declares that she will make Lyjan understand for Luke's sake. Tired, Luke asks Muriel to take over the explanation, and she immediately agrees. She begins by explaining, it is Luke's magic that puts the monsters to sleep. This state not only helps him focus his power, but is necessary because he can continue to cast magic even while she sleeps. She continues and explains that this method allows her to train archery and improve her level. And also, thanks to Luke's strategy, even someone like Lyjan, who is not brilliant in combat, can safely venture into dangerous. Smiling warmly and confidently, Muriel finishes the explanation. She asks Lyjan if he now understands the kindness behind Luke's actions and what exactly he did for their benefit. The insidious tenderness lasted a moment and was immediately cut off. Seeing Luke praise Muriel, Ruby quickly flies up and starts complaining. She says it's unfair and demands that he pat her on the head. Her head also rose above the situation in the same way. Her envy quickly turned into professional irritation. She sharply waved her hand and declared that the dungeon should be a dangerous place. And that, she said, looked more like a regular job than a real team building where you can strengthen bonds by helping one another. Her outburst left Lyjan confused. She admitted, although the situation does not look bad, it still feels strange. But Luke was truly confused by their objections. He asked what exactly was so bad about their conflict. Current method, he listened as Lyjan explained. Her anxiety comes from how safe and easy they clear the dungeon. Luke calmly laid out his logic in response. Their method allows them to easily defeat the monsters they need to hunt, so it benefits both those who want the monsters gone and those who want to reach the very depths of the dungeon. Then his tone sharply changed. His gaze sharpened and he asked Lyjan a pointed question. Did she really want to put her comrades in danger? He clenched his fist and did not finish. He began to criticize exactly this way of acting. Method of fighting, you press the spot, push the question. Does she now understand who among them said something that shouldn't have been said? Confused and suddenly overwhelmed by his pressure, Lyjan stumbled, shook her head, and shouted no. Her own argument. Faltering, seeing her suffering, Luke turned away. His face revealed nothing, and he said they were parting ways for today. The sudden decision left Lyjan speechless and froze from shock. She watched them leave, and a drop of sweat crawled down her temple. Inside, she concluded, if the leader wasn't fully ready, then they really needed to stop. Her gaze fell on the tamed monsters nearby, another reminder that this, after all, was just a practice session. With these thoughts, she turned to the group, shouted an apology, and asked him to wait. But Luke was already settled on the back of a large sleeping creature, with Ruby nearby, and so on FFFFTTTTTTTTTTTTTTTTTTTTTTTTTTTTTTTTTTTTTTTTTTTTTTTTTTTTTTTTTTTTTTTTTTTTTTTTTTTTTTTTTTTTTTTTTTTTTTTTTTTTTTTTTTTTTTTTTTTTTTTTTTTTTTTTTTTTTTTTTTTTTTTTTTTTTTTTTTTTTTTTTTTTTTTTTTTTTTTTTTTTTTTTTTTTTTTTTTTTTTTTTTTTTTTTTTTTTTTTTTTTTTTTTTTTTTTTTTTTTTTTTTTTTTTTTTTTTTTTTTTTTTTTTTTTTTTTTTTTTTTTTTTTTTTTTTTTTTTTTTTTTTTTTTTTTTTTTTTTTTTTTTTTTTTTTTTTTTTTTTTTTTTTTTTTTTTTTTTTTTTTTTTTTTTTTTTTTTTTTTTT because there was still enough time. Lijin could only stare, stuck between her early outburst and his plastic acid demeanor. His simple statement was enough. In a moment, both Ruby and Lijin went on alert. The previous conflict ended and their gazes locked on the city again. After intense training in the dungeon, the task hangs for a moment. Loop relaxes, leans back on the large slime creature, lying comfortably amid a sea of smoke. Smaller to him, his rest is interrupted for a moment while the group prepares to move on. While Ruby celebrates their way home and Luke searches for magical stones to deliver to the school, Lijin calls his name and her expression changes. Serious, she officially demands a ranked duel against him. Luke lets out a weary sigh. His patients are clearly on edge as he asks if she has already forgotten that happened with Dan. Lijin begins to resist, insisting the fight would be pointless under other conditions, but Luke cuts her off mid-sentence. With a cold command, he orders Ruby to become the opponent, and the Beastman girl is immediately ready. Volunteers, his eyes narrow with tension. He declares his absolute hatred for uncivilized people and directly opposes Lijin, asking if she really wants to fight and drag the whole team into it. Life on the line, he continues, explaining if her only goal is to prove who is right, then fighting Ruby is the same as fighting him. But even despite this, he finally puts the dots. He does not goes into battle. Having stated his position, he returns to Ruby to check, does she agree with the arrangement? She joyfully utters Naya and nods in confirmation. Having lost, Lijin quietly resigns. Accepts the terms. While they look at each other, Ruby lays out her logic. She admits she has no real reason to fight, but she understands that this is a huge compromise for Lijin, a clumsy person who can only express himself this way. More than a fight, understanding nothing, Ruby instantly jumps into the air and formally challenges Lijin to a ranked match as a Luke substitute. With new determination, Lijin agrees. Luke watches silently, hoping that this will be enough to satisfy her. In the academic courtyard, Ruby approaches Lijin Marshall. She asks why Lijin, an adventurer who should be picky about fights, approves of Luke. Lijin, turning to face her, simply asks, what does Ruby want? Ruby explains that the true goal of a traveler is not fighting. Lijin reacts with complete disbelief and calls her an idiot for such a statement. She explains travelers strive to survive, putting their lives on the line against monsters, and even better when no one gets hurt. In the background, other students, including Mural, watch as this confrontation unfolds. With a focused gleam in her eyes, Ruby declares that nothing makes her happier than a fight of this kind and promises to leave some other matter for later. After that, she directly challenges Lijin and he agrees, suggesting to make this an official ranked match. The match begins with an explosion of movement. Ruby dashes forward with incredible speed, crouches lower and provokes Lijin to look down while she closes the distance in a fraction of a second. The attack hits Lichen's shield. The knight apprentice flinches and grits his teeth, holding the blow, which unexpectedly turned out to be too strong from the small adventurer. Lijin grits her teeth in frustration. She's used to training and sparring during her official lessons, but still understands she simply cannot keep up with Ruby's insane speed. She tries to keep up with Ruby's speed and shudders at the realization she cannot raise her shield in time to defend herself. Ruby, a continuous blurred movement before her eyes, cuts in. She is too slow. A joyful smile spreads across Ruby's face as she sharply jumps into the air and calls the wind to strengthen her next strike. A blow, strengthened by the wind, flies into the Lichen shield with incredible force, breaking its defense and throwing it to the ground. It is toppled. Ruby stands victorious over the fallen opponent. Ruby lay defeated until the proctor's voice officially declared Ruby the winner. Only she turned on the spot to Luke and Labura and simply said, "The fight is over." Then she spread her arms to the sides and shouted a joyful cry of victory. Luke simply said, "Well done," while the proctor spoke off-screen that their ratings would accordingly change. He stepped closer and patted Ruby on the head as if greeting her, and the cat person immediately tensed and listened intently. And his gaze returned to Lijin, who was forcibly rising to her knees. She looked at him and asked gloomily what he wanted. "That's exactly what I was thinking," he replied, then added that he wanted to take her to the infirmary. After a short pause, Lijin quietly agreed. With her consent, Ruby and Labura went to help the wounded, listening to her footsteps. Luke told them that they would part ways for the day, and Labura nodded, ready to help. Here, where Dana was held, Merle explained a complicated story. She said that before reincarnation, Lijin was her favorite character from the game. Although one of Lijin's storylines ended with her becoming the perfect wife, Merle chose a completely different path, one where Lijin loses to Luke and is forced to marry him. And in that timeline, later the game's protagonist attacks Luke's base and defeats him. She continued and showed Dana an image on the screen, the main hero reaching out to Lijun. Merle explained that this was necessary so that the main hero could take Lijun after Luke was dead, and suggested they live together again. The story she recounted showed a tragic scene from that game. Lijun held Luke, who was dying, in her arms and declared that he had become her only family. The memory ended with a desperate confrontation that brought Dana's game double face to face with Dana right above Luke's body. Tears streamed down her face and she accused him bluntly, "Dan, you killed my husband." He remains silent. In his mind remains the image of Lijun from that other timeline, her hand on his double's shoulder, her face stern, and this scene does not let go. The scene unfolds as Muriel said. Lijun holds Luke, who is dying, in her arms. Her voice is full of torment as she declares that she will never belong to the victor even if it costs her life. Her double just stands and watches, calling the princess in amazement. The protagonist from that timeline, the one who dealt the decisive blow, breaks into curses of despair as Luke's body falls. He stands amid the fading power of his attack and already understands. The one who took the Lishan chastity, it is her fate, her destined one. The burden of this alternate history weighs on Dan. Drops of sweat appear on his forehead as Muriel's voice explains that Lijun became completely devoted to Lucas until the bitter end. She finishes her story and her gaze is sharp. The memory of Lijun's pure and deep devotion, even supporting a tear in Luke, becomes for her a picture that, as she says, has burned out deep in her mouth. Then her thoughts unravel again on another possible route from the game. She reflects. A girl with such a pure soul will give herself to any man, becoming the perfect, worthless machine for a man. And then Riley begins to doubt her own role, whether she is making him worthless if he cannot be worthless without F. Meanwhile, in Academy Hall, the consequences of another confrontation unfold. Lijun sits on the floor, humiliated by defeat, and calls Luke by her surname Disgustos. She looks down at him. His face is a mask of complete indifference, and Dan watches from the south. Luke shifts his gaze to Dan and asks why the princess did not challenge him. Dan explains he refused, so she fought against Ruby. Luke admits that Lijun lost but focuses on the fact that the challenge was not addressed to him. At him, he admits his surprise, having been on guard for another confrontation, yet finding Luke completely calm. Dan realizes this is the first real conversation they have ever had. Luke, hearing this, only acknowledged. He freezes, surprised, as Dan approaches and apologizes, admitting that he feels it was he who caused Luke so many problems. Luke can only mumble something in response, and it really catches him off guard. Waiting, Dan slightly tilts his head and offers a simple, direct apology for his past actions. Luke remains on guard. Inside, he doubts why this sudden change of mood happened so quickly, because from the game he remembers the protagonist quite differently, much more impulsive and hot-tempered. He is gnawed by the thought. What are Dan's true intentions? Their thoughts drift to eavesdropping, who, despite her tears, she proclaims her decision. She reminds him that the Duke is disgusted by those remains which are hostile to the princess and that someday she will have to defeat him. Luke agrees. This Den is different from the one he expected. Expectation cracks, silence explodes. Den points at Elyuk and praises him as incredibly hardworking. He is far ahead of everyone, and admits Elyuk is not the disgusting nobility he initially seemed to be. Moved by his own confession, Dan tells him to be quiet. On Luke's lips a faint smile flickers as he replies, noting that even an idiot manages. He then addresses Den more seriously, acknowledges him as an enemy but not a bad person, while Den takes the unconscious leash in his hands. Lucas says he will keep her under his care, and then Den offers his own. Thank you. Holding Lijun, Dan internally repeats Luke's words and realizes one must still clearly not mix the lines. Then he aloud warns Luke that the princess may resist, and her position may prevent her from heeding his request not to attack. Lijun, though unconscious, seems to sense a shift. A thought slides through her mind about how suddenly Dan became defenseless. When Dan stands next to Lijun. Nearby appears the main character of the game and, looking at them with a cold gaze, only snorts disdainfully, calls Dan a plebeian, and declares that he knows nothing. He lowers his gaze to the stunned Dan, and a faint smile trembles on his lips. He advises Dan to remain as he is and grow into a wonderful protector. Protagonist, turning to leave, he adds a final clarification and asks Dan not to misunderstand. This, he assures, will be best for him. Finally, he walks away. A confident smile twitches on his face, and he himself reflects on his true nature. He tells himself he is the laziest and most vile of the nobles. Finally, the thought causes a quiet chuckle on his lips, and this leaves Dan trembling, completely confused. As he walks away, a thought flashes in his mind about incredible crosses. All attention, along with the class, shifts to Silas, the teacher's assistant. She announces the start of extracurricular activities. Each team will spend the next 3 days in the dungeon. Efficiency. She outlines the rules for the gathered students, and the instructors will take turns in the dungeon. She warns, if they call for help without urgent need, it will worsen their grade. With the basic skills they have already mastered, now they are expected to obtain their own food and sh. While the students begin to prepare, Muriel encounters Dan and asks why he is completely unarmed and came empty-handed. She snaps in an irritated tone, recalling that Lijin promised not to interfere with his methods, but something called him. Anyway, she points to her own extensive gear, full armor, and a large backpack, and declares that women must be prepared. For 3 days on the hike, she insists they need a lot of supplies, although aloud she wonders if she has too much baggage. Nearby, Libera, Glicko, and Ruby watch the exchange. Libera notices the difference between Muriel, a young noblewoman, and Ruby, an adventurer used to camping. Yet even so, Libera agrees Muriel seems to have brought too much. Muriel, on the other hand, just smiles and orders Labrie to briefly tell Ruby about the nuances of the dungeon. While she speaks, Ruby playfully attacks her bag, calls Muriel to wait, and tries to figure out. She tries to advise the unprepared Dan, says to leave in his bundle only what he can carry and that he does not need a large water skin. Dan, kneeling in despair, wonders why this happened to him. Meanwhile, Lijin tries to take control, calls everyone to listen as he begins to explain how to navigate. Lysiane's attempt to organize the group falters because Ruby is fussing again, and Lysiane has to forcibly hold the cat girl. Eventually, Ruby gives up and admits she took too many unnecessary things. But Labura, on the contrary, notices Dan and says he has a different problem, then aloud wonders, did he bring too little? She mentally reviews her own preparations, a convenient bundle bag, everything in one place where clothes, food, and shelter lie. Noticing Lijin's stern expression, Libero cannot hide her doubt. Is she worried? Lijin sharply clarifies that she will not share anything of her food. Then she addresses Dan directly and says that everyone must get along these 3 days. With a detached expression, he simply orders her not to. Don't worry about him. As soon as the squad enters the forest, Dan has already sprawled out on a large, soft pillow. Lijin says they need to find a campsite before dark. Ruby and Libera immediately support this proposal. His relaxation is cut short by Muriel's arrival. She is dragging a huge backpack. She says that in the end she entrusted everything to Dan and recalls how he told her. She started carrying him to the infirmary. At some point she approaches Libera, who is reading, and asks if she is training even now. Muriel explains that she is repaying Dan for a kindness done once. She adds an unexpected detail. Ruby, whom Muriel considers stronger than herself, insists that Dan is even stronger. Stronger than Ruby? Hearing this, Dan sharply snaps the book shut, slamming the cover. He tells Muriel to stop talking, warns that they are entering the dungeon, and proclaims his personal hatred for her. He fusses back and forth, then settles back on his mat and casually says that he will continue to rely on others. He adds, they all sacrifice their weekends to prepare for this training, hinting he did not do it. Despite his indifference, 3 girls, Ruby, Lijin, and Labura, stick together and are ready. With determined faces, they confirm their readiness in unison and declare that it's time to start. She turned around, her gaze sharp and firm, and the cloak lay on her shoulders. Behind her, all members of Class 0 gathered, Dan in armor, Ruby in a hooded cloak, and the rest ready for the trial ahead. The game protagonist stood among them, strangely holding Dan's large pillow. Their goal was announced, conquering the dungeon. Below opened the trap itself, a dark, broken abyss. Chasm of shadows with a single distant spot of light promising a deep descent. Ruby, the cat-like beastman, notices a target in the shadows and declares she will hunt it. Muriel, enchanted by the height, climbs up and entrusts this task to the creature. Then she calls Lijin and assigns her to hold the upper area, and order Lijin immediately accepts. After the fight, Ruby anxiously approaches Muriel and asks if she is okay. Muriel, though breathing heavily, flashes a bright smile and assures that she has even caught up and will not be a burden to the group. Then she turns to Luke and suggests that nearby is a good place to set up camp. Muriel gently advises Ruby not to overdo it, to which the beastman gratefully thanks her. In a moment, the camp appears before their eyes, not just a tent, but a luxuriously arranged structure. Muriel freezes in complete shock. Her jaw drops as she exclaims, "What is this?" Luke calmly explains, such a tent is practically an invitation to attack. He points to the shower cabin and says that after a long day outside, he wants to wash up and sleep in a proper bed because body care is important. Muriel still mutters in shock that his actions only interfere When she suggests getting some dried meat, Luke announces that it's time for dinner. He adds, apparently her sister spent last year the same way and even perfected it. The admission completely overwhelms Muriel. Suddenly, a luxurious dish unfolds on the table, bean pasta and soup with dried meat, vegetables, and mushrooms. Luke says that Karen brought durable dishes and there is enough for everyone at once, so everyone must eat together. He himself freezes and aloud wonders how they managed to get such a luxurious dinner while camping. Muriel, tasting it, is noticeably moved and says it is simply divine. Lijan agrees, saying it is so tasty that it is unfair to the body, and praises Karen for her skill. Late that evening, while the girls prepare for bed in their nightcaps, Meryl declares she will take the first watch because everyone else is already going to bed. From her bed, Ruby calls out to her and asks exactly whom she intends to stand guard against, while meanwhile in the tent, Lukey pours himself a drink and Lishan takes a shower. Ruby says that a watch is not needed. Luke, she clarifies, can use his magic even in sleep, so no monster can come closer than 30 meters. The thought reaches Muriel and she freezes, unable to utter a word as soon as she understands the logic. Magic, she shudders when Lishan addresses her formally as princess and immediately asks why he suddenly changed the title. Meanwhile, Lishan glanced at the big bed where Luke had already fallen asleep. Her attention jerks back to Muriel as soon as she demands to know her intentions. Lishan skirts around with words about being from martial territory, and this noticeably shocks Muriel. From the stun of surprise, Muriel sharply closes her face. She directly asks Lishan whether he hated Luke up to this very moment. Lishan hesitates, realizing that as long as Luke is here, he looks as if he is sound asleep. She approaches the bed and sees that both Luke and Karen are still awake. Merle explains, Luke usually resorts to sleep and magic to fall asleep instantly at the appointed time, but she suggests he might be deliberately staying awake because he longs to hear their true feelings for him. Tension among the three girls is rising. Ruby suggests listening and Muriel agrees. They say that talking everything through to the end can help each of them sort out their thoughts and feelings. Taking advantage of the moment, Lishan begins with apologies for his arrogant and selfish behavior during the practical training. Muriel looks stunned by the straightforwardness of these apologies. She lowers her head low, sincerely regrets. A wave of relief washes over Meryl's face. Seeing this, Ruby cheerfully tells Lizianu to raise her head and declares that she accepts the apology. A smile brightens Lijan's face. She asks to be called by her first name and says she hopes they can all get along as a team and classmates. Karen and Ruby happily agree, trying to pronounce her name. From the bed, Lucas, who pretended to be asleep, silently realizes that eavesdropping on her private conversation is indecent. He is relieved they have reconciled. When dawn breaks the night, he stands outside the tent. The morning routine is complete. His thoughts are already clinging to the next goal, to train to learn how to cast several spells simultaneously. He began training by throwing several valve slimes into the air. Thanks to their tracking ability, they detected any living creature within a 30-meter radius. Then he activated his control technique, allowing his consciousness to remotely control his body while he slept. Meanwhile, Val's defense system was set to intercept any threats that might appear in perception. A mental map surfaced in his mind, safe targets in blue and those requiring caution in yellow. But one target glowed red, an enemy was approaching his tent. An alarming ping struck his head exactly at the moment when the Lijan marshal lunged at him. He hovered in the air and began juggling magical spheres, guessing the moment. This was the perfect chance to hone magical regulation. He understood that casting 3 spells at once meant significantly draining his power. Her sword sliced through the air where he had just stood. With a cold face, he asked if she really wanted to be killed and reminded her, if he killed her in the dungeon, no evidence of her would remain. The Lijan met his threat with a confident, self-satisfied smile, as if even impressed by his skill. She lowered her weapon and explained she had been watching his actions earlier. She noticed how he simultaneously used a fierce fighting style and several spells at once, calling it an incredible technique. Then she directly asked, "Is this his true power?" Continuing her thought, she admitted that she now understood how foolishly she had behaved and demanded that he fight her. While she spoke, Luke, lying in his tent, began to stir, trying to understand her true goal. Her thoughts abruptly returned to the conversation with Dan. He advised not to blindly believe what she hears, but to see everything with her own eyes and draw her own conclusion. This advice became a turning point for her. Then she declared that even if their families were rival nobles, it did not automatically mean that Luke became her personal. Luke considered this. He realized her change in attitude, as with Dan, was a serious deviation from the original course of events. He was afraid that too many changes would make everything hard to control, but he concluded. If his victory in their first duel was the cause, then the responsibility to fix everything lay with him, just this one. Months, he stood up and looked at her directly. "I will fight you now," he said, but immediately added a condition. "This is the only time. Promise you will never challenge me again." The Lysian turned and a clear surprise froze on her face. Surprise, he stands with an impassive face while Lysian beams thanks him for accepting her challenge. Challenge? Then she asked what exactly they were betting in this fight. In response, he materialized a small ball of light in his hand and said there were no stakes, explaining his belief that by intertwining blades, they could have a conversation with F. Heart. Inside, he exhales through his teeth, thinking that she is a complete battle maniac. Without missing a beat, she directs the sword at him and declares that this single clash is enough for her to fully understand him. Completely, she prepares a stance and shouts for him to get ready. In response, he recalls Slime Valve. He knows that if he uses tribute magic, the fight will end in an instant, but he decides to definitely meet her halfway and fulfill her whim of dialogue. A short time passed and she dashed forward, blurring in motion. He raised his hand to stop the blow, and a composed, calm concentration froze on his face. Her strike throws him back, forcing him to slide on the ground, but he still remains. Steady, she presses her advantage relentlessly, continuously attacking while he parries every blow, enhancing it with magic. While the exchange of blows continues, she analyzes his technique. She admits his manipulative magic is truly formidable, but at the same time notes that the movements of an untrained user are simple and easy to predict. With a sharp gaze, she searches for a vulnerability in his defense. He, squinting slightly tensely, thinks to himself, it's time to end the duel. But Lysian, on the contrary, is visibly gasping for breath and drenched in sweat from ag. Exhaustion weighs down, but despite the fatigue, she roars that this is not the end yet. Before rushing into attack again, she is twisted by shock, and at that very moment he has already closed the distance between them. His hand hovered right in front of her face. She could only break free from the shock with an exhale, just as Lucas, without striking, leaned forward and pressed his lips to. Near her cheek, he pulled back and lightly touched her forehead with his fingers. "I won," he said briefly, stood up and walked away. Lysian remained lying on the ground, completely stunned, unable to move. Motionless, she raised her hand to her mouth and her face flushed as a wave of heat covered her. From somewhere far away, Lucas calmly told her to go and get shower. Later, already dressed in the academy uniform, he sat alone at the table and calmly noted that breakfast was ready. The next morning, under a clear sky, Karen tried to wake Luke. He mumbled that she should eat for him in advance and was going to sleep a little more. Later, Muriel approached him and said with some urgency that something was wrong in the forest. It felt strange. She explained that she could not find a single monster in the forest. Anywhere? He asked if she knew anything, and she confirmed the situation was serious. Activating his tracking ability, Luke noticed that only his own marker appeared. The realization came to him in. Meanwhile, Meryl explained one phenomenon to Ruby and Lysian. When dungeons are overloaded with hunting, they release a boss to cut down intruders, absorbing weaker monsters for power. It was then that Lysian suddenly screamed in alarm, confirming that the boss fight had started against the giant monster. Somewhere else, a dark-skinned student just waking up realized what she had seen earlier and jumped up. "Kiss." Luke, irritated, waved it off, saying it was a coincidence, and told her not to work about it. Lysian was still lost in thought and wondered if it really was a kiss. Ruby sharply interrupted her and reminded her that the boss was more important. Lysian pulled herself together, then ordered Ruby to go and check a specific. When she confirms to Muriel that their camp is securely protected, Luke catches her gaze. He asks where the boss is, then immediately shows the way forward. Suddenly, he grabs her hand, making her flinch, and urges her on. They need to hurry because their place is very close. Myra watches. Surprised, without waiting for an answer, he pulls her into a sprint and leads the group as they rush through the forest at full speed. In the clearing ahead of them, a colossal slimy monster shudders, its gelatinous body growing and looming over landscape. Luke's expression twisted with disgust. He thought real truly disgusting, unlike the cute forest creatures he had imagined. Suddenly, a powerful stream of water strikes the giant jelly-like mass. Nearby, Liberaglico is seen casting a spell. The gem on her magic wand glows and intensely. The attack immediately shows Team 1 has already engaged in the fight. Luke understands that events are unfolding just like in the original story. As soon as Dan draws his sword to join the clash, Luke begins to call Val, and he's settled high on a tree branch and the valve hangs nearby. Below on the ground, Ruby notices him and demands to know where he is heading. Calmly, he replies that he is simply heading to